for use in that age category, 12 and up. Today, an independent advisory committee to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, voted to recommend its use. Now, pending the CDC's final approval later today, we're going to have for the first time a safe and effective COVID-19 vaccine for adolescents over the 12 years of age. And this is one more giant step on our fight against the pandemic. I sincerely think the scientists, researchers, and clinical trial participants deserve our thanks. They've all made this possible. Because of them, nearly 17 million more Americans are eligible to get vaccinated, and now, I encourage each of them and their parents to get their vaccination shots right away. And here's why. We know that kids at this age, 12 and above, are at risk from COVID-19. About 3 million COVID-19 cases have been reported in kids under 17 years of age. And teenagers can spread it to their friends, to their siblings, to their parents, and to their grandparents. Now, that vaccine is authorized for ages 12 and up. And I encourage their parents to make sure they get the shot. As I promised last week, we're ready. This new population is going to find the vaccine rollout fast and efficient. As of tomorrow, more than 15,000 pharmacies across this country will be ready to vaccinate this age group. Most of these pharmacies are close to family as the family home, as the kids' school is to their family home. We're also going to be getting vaccines to pediatricians and family doctors, so parents and children can talk to their doctors who they trust about getting the vaccination, and they'll be able to do it at that office. We're also partnering with school-based clinics and community health centers. Of course, we remain focused on equity in our vaccine program. The vaccine is free for everyone, free. Additionally, if teens are on the move this summer, they can get their first shot in one place and a second shot elsewhere. And at the same time, we're also launching an important public education campaign. First and foremost, we're providing families with trusted medical information they need to make informed decisions about the vaccination and the vaccine. Our medical and scientific experts at CDC and the National Institute of Health will be out there in the public every day to answer questions and get the facts out. We will also be partnering with the healthcare providers, schools, community organizations, states and tribes and cities at the same time. The bottom line is this. The vaccine for kids between the ages of 12 and 15 are safe, effective, easy, fast, and free. So my hope is that parents will take advantage of the vaccine and get their kids vaccinated. Now let's remember that millions of 16 and 17-year-olds have also been safely vaccinated. And as more and more Americans get vaccinated, COVID-19 hospitalizations and death rates continue to fall. Today, the New York Times reported the number of COVID hospitalizations in the United States since April of 2020, right after the start of this pandemic, is the lowest. Safe and effective vaccines are curbing the spread of the virus, and they're saving thousands of lives, and allowing millions of Americans to start returning to a closer to normal life. As I said earlier, for everyone 12 years and up, it's never been easier or more convenient to get vaccinated. Visit vaccine.gov to find out where, or text your zip code to 438829. That is 438829. Text your zip code to that number, and you'll find the closest vaccine facilities to you at that moment. It's easy, it's convenient, and it's free. So if you haven't gotten vaccinated or still have questions, talk to someone you trust, your physician, your pharmacist, your next door neighbor who got the shot. Talk to your faith leaders. Look at the folks in your community who've gotten vaccinated and are getting back to living their lives. Their grandparents united with their grandkids, friends getting together again. I've been saying this for a long time, but I believe it. This is not a Democratic or Republican issue. This is about life and death. It's about getting us closer to normal. Let me conclude with this. In light of the end that we've been talking about, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Well, it's growing brighter and brighter. And we need all of you to bring it home. Americans ages 12 and up, get vaccinated. And on July 4th, let's celebrate our independence as a nation and our independence from this virus. We can do this. And as I said a little bit earlier today in another context, I don't believe that the American people, there's any significant portion of American people who refuse to get vaccinated. You keep hearing about how Republicans won't and this. Look, if it's available, if it's nearby, if it's convenient, people are getting vaccinated. I believe the vast majority of Americans are going to get vaccinated. That's the route we're going now. So may God bless you all and may God protect our troops. And if you've been vaccinated, you don't have to wear this outside around people unless there's really large groups. And you don't have to wear it inside if you're with people that that have also been vaccinated. So protect yourself, protect your neighbors. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Mr. President, what can you say to Americans who are worried about the supply of gas at rising prices right now?
We have been in very, very close contact with Colonial Pipeline, which is the one area you're talking about where one of the reasons the gasoline prices are going up. And I think you're going to hear some good news in the next 24 hours. And I think we'll be getting that under control. Secondly, I have, in the meantime, made it easier for us to have lifted some of the restrictions on the transportation of fuel, as well as access to the United States military providing fuel and with vehicles to get it there where places where it's badly needed. And I'd also point out that I think what this shows is that I think we have to make a greater investment in education as it relates to being able to train and graduate more people proficient in cybersecurity. I've been saying for a long, long time now, I know you could probably say it for me, but I think that one of the most important things we have to do to reclaim our place as a leading innovator in the world is to have a better educated workforce. And that goes back to the days a long time ago now, over 5 years ago, and I was vice president, and I surveyed all the Fortune 500 companies, said, what do you most need? And remember what they said, better educated workforce. But they're not spending money to educate the workforce. And but it's important that we do this. And the cybersecurity piece is one I think you're going to see where we need significantly larger number of experts in the area of cybersecurity working for private companies, as well as private companies being willing to share data as to how they're protecting themselves. I think that's part of the long-term answer, not just in terms of energy, but across the board. I know that's not a direct response to your question, but it does impact on it, I think, down the road.
Are you concerned about the violence in the Middle East? And can you talk about what conversations you have had with officials there?
My national security staff and defense staff has been in constant contact with their counterparts in the Middle East, not just with the Israelis, but also with everyone from the Egyptians to the Saudis to the Emiratis, etc. And I had a conversation with Bibi Netanyahu not too long ago. I'll be putting out a statement very shortly on that. My expectation and hope is that this will be closing down sooner than later. But Israel has a right to defend itself when you have thousands of rockets flying into your territory. But I had a conversation for a while with the Prime Minister of Israel, and I think that my hope is that we'll see this coming to conclusion sooner than later. Thank you.
What's your take on the end of your meeting, sir? Were you optimistic on that today?
Which one of the 12 I've had?
Infrastructure, sir, and in particular.
You guys are bad. I'm not supposed to be answering all these questions. I'm supposed to leave, but I can't resist your questions. I came away encouraged. But I want to make it clear to you. I'm encouraged not just because of a solid meeting with the Republican leader in the House and with Mitch or Senator McConnell, who I've known a long, long time and worked with. I've been meeting with bipartisan leaders for a long time now. I've met with gosh knows how many. I mean, and there's more than one single group. There's bipartisan groups made up of 10 to 20 members. There's been groups that I met with. For example, I met with yesterday with Kristen Sinema. I thought that was and she purported, and I believe her, to speak for some of the her friends who are both sides of the aisle about how to go forward with infrastructure. So I'm encouraged that there is room to have a compromise on a bipartisan bill that's solid and significant, and a means by which to pay for it without dropping all of the burden on middle class and working class people. Look, what's the one thing people are concerned about with the gasoline prices going up? Exactly right. And it matters if you make $40,000 a year. It matters if you're a two-family person that making $80,000, two wage earners. It matters. And what I don't want to do, and this will be another discussion we didn't get into today, is how to pay for it. And if everything is paid for by a user fee, well then, the burden falls on working class folks who are having trouble. We're getting them out of it. They're coming around, but this has to be a burden shared across the spectrum. Anyway, thank you guys.
Should Americans be worried about inflation, sir?
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. People haven't been traveling much, they've been stuck at home, but if you had a chance to visit New York City recently, if you have, you know the truth, it's awful. Awful in a very recognizable way. New York today looks a lot like New York in the 1970s, but without Studio 54. The city has once again become dirty, chaotic, and dangerous. The parks and train stations look like refugee camps for mentally ill drug users. Just as in the 1970s, a lot of people who live in New York are fleeing. In fact, maybe you're one of them. Maybe you're watching this show right now, maskless, from your patio in Fort Lauderdale or Naples, glass of wine in hand, and thinking to yourself, why should I care about what happens in New York? I voted with my feet, I got out of that place. Let it rot. And honestly, that's a fair point. But consider another perspective. New York is the biggest city in the United States. More than 8 million people live there, including Americans. What happens in New York affects all of us. In the end, we're going to have to pay for the damage anyway, so we might as well root for the best outcome there. Tonight, believe it or not, something good might be happening in New York City. In fact, something good is happening there. Bill de Blasio is heading for retirement. We know that for sure. The single worst mayor in the history of representative government has reached the end of his second disastrous term. The long municipal nightmare is over. De Blasio's leaving. So the question is, who replaces him? Until recently, we assumed that would be Andrew Yang, the guy who just the other day was running for president. We talked to him as he ran, and we found that unlike a lot of 2020 Democrats, Beto O'Rourke, looking at you, Andrew Yang is not stupid. In fact, he's legitimately smart. At times, he's been insightful and willing to talk about interesting ideas in public. Unfortunately, in the end, the weight of Andrew Yang's life credentials, Exeter, Brown, Columbia Law School, pulled him back to the poisonous culture that produced him in the first place, and he embraced, probably inevitably, the dumbest kind of identity politics. So at this point, the only real difference between Andrew Yang and the next unhappy lady browsing the aisles at Whole Foods in a mask is that Andrew Yang is slightly more articulate. And that's sad. Another one bites the dust. But still, we assumed that Andrew Yang would win the Democratic primary in New York because it's the Democratic primary in New York, but we were wrong. He may not win. It turns out New York is changing. All that urban decay appears to have awakened voters to actual issues. According to a new poll, Andrew Yang is losing as of today to a guy called Eric Adams. He's the Brooklyn borough president, controversial for many years. In a lot of ways, Eric Adams is a conventional big city Democrat. He's into identity politics too. The difference is that Eric Adams is eccentric enough to say what he really thinks once in a while. For example, in a speech last year, Adams launched into an attack on the smug, fussy liberals who have flooded into New York over the past 3 decades. He addressed an audience of people who have to live with them, and you can sympathize. Quote, "You were here before Starbucks. You were here before others came and decided they wanted to be part of this city. Folks are not only hijacking your apartments and displacing your living arrangements, they displace your conversations and say that things that are important to you are no longer important." So what exactly was Eric Adams talking about? What are the important things that smug, fussy liberals don't want you to talk about? Well, crime and disorder mostly, and those matter. Once you're afraid of getting shot to death while walking to the store, once you can't use the park across the street because vagrants are living there, nothing else really matters. No matter what color you are, crime and disorder define your life. And whatever else he is, Eric Adams is bright enough to understand that. He spent 20 years as a cop in New York. Here's his announcement for mayor.
We're facing a crisis unlike anything we've ever seen before. Businesses are closing, crime is rising, homelessness is soaring, and our families are struggling. We can't have an education system that fails to put our children on a pathway of success and leaves them at a dead end of crime and hopelessness.
So businesses are closing, crime is rising, homelessness is soaring. Adams said that out loud, and by itself, that is a victory in the context of New York politics, a victory of reality over delusion. For years, there has been a rigid code among those smug, fussy liberals in New York City that you're not allowed to notice as things fall apart. And to the extent that you do notice, you're supposed to think it's charming or diverse or somehow related to equity. More drug ODs in Penn Station. How vibrant. But Eric Adams doesn't think that way at all. He thinks all of that is awful. And here's his solution. Don't put up with that crap. Bring back order, crack down, make New York City safe again. Everything depends on it. And he's right. Watch.
It doesn't make any consolation if a police officer shoots someone illegally or if a gangbanger in blue jeans. No matter what community I am in, people want their families to be safe. And that resonates with everyday New Yorkers. And I know my message will resonate with them. If we're not safe in the city, companies are not coming to New York. Our multi-billion-dollar tourism industry is not going to return if tourists are shot at Grand Central Station. And so the first order of business is to get violence under control.
Well, yeah, the first order of business is to get violence under control. You would think that would be the top priority of every New York City politician. Why have a mayor otherwise? But it's not their top priority. It's not even close. The current mayor spends half his life opining on global warming, even as he pollutes the atmosphere with his weed smoke. Eric Adams is actually serious about fighting crime. How serious? He said if he becomes mayor, he plans to carry his own gun. Can you imagine Bill de Blasio doing that? He would shoot himself by accident.
So as mayor, would you carry a firearm on you even with a security detail?
Yes, I will, number one. And number two, I won't have a security detail. If the city is safe, the mayor shouldn't have a security detail with him. He should be walking the street by himself. Number three, the hypocrisy of those who are citywide officials who said that you shouldn't have guns in church. Those guys that walk in with them, they got guns.
So you can tell how true something is by how the usual hysterics respond to it. In this case, they were totally horrified. Display bravery? Defend yourself? Show evidence of a higher than average testosterone level? How could you? Eric Adams later suggested he might have been joking, but as you just saw, he wasn't joking. He obviously meant that. And normal voters appreciated it. Why wouldn't they? Meanwhile, once promising Andrew Yang has descended deeper into the self-discrediting absurdity of modern identity politics, something that it turns out most voters actually don't like. Who knew? At a forum the other day, Yang was asked about violence against Asian Americans. Now, every single human being in New York City understands where that violence comes from, but of course Yang did not say that. His solution? Give more taxpayer money to racial affinity groups aligned with the Democratic Party. That'll make Asian grandmothers safe. Except it won't make Asian grandmothers or anyone else safe, we know, because we tried it. It doesn't work. All that does work is enforcing the law. And most people know that. Yet enforcing the law is the one thing that Andrew Yang opposes. Yang has called for taking more money from the NYPD budget and giving it to mental health services, whatever that means. Then in a radio interview, Yang suggested that defunding the police by $1 billion, which they've done, might not be enough.
You know, they did shift $1 billion from the NYPD, you know, to other things. But would you do more than that? Would you do more than $1 billion?
I think that's what we need to be looking at. The reality is, if you're going to look at the city budget, the NYPD is the most likely place to look because we're just spending a lot of money on the NYPD.
The sad thing is people like Andrew Yang, Exeter Brown, Columbia, are such craven butt kissers, they don't understand the advantage in telling the truth. If he'd said to the radio host, "Are you joking? Defund the police? That's insane." The radio host probably would have agreed with him, but that's not what Yang did. He tried to suck up and he humiliated himself, and then he went on from there. Yang has demanded that the police learn martial arts, purple belt at minimum, so they won't have to use their weapons, just well-placed karate chops. Yang has also called for changing the uniforms and titles in police departments across the country. Quote, "I might rename them Guardians," he wrote, "and adopt a different color scheme." Oh, a different color scheme. You gotta wonder, is there still a constituency for ideas this stupid? And the answer is, of course. Grad school liberals love this stuff. Fawning over criminals makes them feel good about themselves. And then when things disintegrate, as of course they will, the grad school liberals just leave. They literally head for the hills, Telluride, Aspen, Beaver Creek, anywhere without the, quote, crime problem. And a lot of them are doing that now. The liberals who still remain in New York don't have much use for Eric Adams, weirdly. He's the one black candidate they don't like. You get the feeling he doesn't like them back. He definitely doesn't believe them when they talk. Here's Eric Adams on the radio in July sympathizing with, of all people, Donald Trump.
We're in a period of sexy headline. Truth be damned, man. Nobody cares about truth anymore. Man, this is a Instagram, Twitter universe where people say, listen, we're sexy, we're sales. That's what it is. The same thing they accused Donald Trump of. Man, that far left, please, man. We know moderate thinking, communication, real facts don't even matter in this universe we're in right now.
Could it be that things have fallen apart to such an extent in New York that they've gotten so crazy that someone like Eric Adams, who you would have laughed off the stage 18 months ago as crazy himself, actually is the sanest guy running and maybe the one person who can save the city from itself? We don't know, but it wouldn't be the weirdest thing that's happened this year.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.
I'll put you first. 2 of everything you deserve. 3 wishes, please. Get you diamonds from your feet. Name it. I can give you what you want. You just need to put it on a checklist.
We are here in Omaha, Nebraska this morning with Warren Buffett, the chairman and CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. He's just released his 55th annual shareholder letter to the shareholders over this weekend, and this is actually the 13th year that we are now in Omaha talking to him after that letter. This is a show that we call Ask Warren, so that people can write in their own questions to Mr. Buffett after they've read that shareholders letter. But obviously this morning, given the news, there are a lot of other questions that people have concerning the stock market. Let's jump right into it with Mr. Buffett, who is here with us right now. And Warren, thank you for being here today. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
I want to talk about the letter. Obviously, one of the things that you touch on in the on the letter is when people should be buying stocks. We're going to dig into a lot of it, but when you're looking at the futures down about 818 points this morning, I think probably the first thing viewers want to hear from you are your thoughts on what's happening with the coronavirus, if this is a reason to panic, and if you are worried about this.
Well, I don't know I have any special thoughts beyond the news on the coronavirus. The very first day I bought stocks was March 12th, 1942. And the stocks were down about 2% that day, as it turned out. Unfortunately, I bought in the morning, so when I came home in the evening, and my dad told me the execution price, it was down 2%. But if you're buying a business, and that's what stocks are, businesses. In fact, people would be better off if they say, I bought a business today, not a stock today, because that gives you a different perspective on it. Then presumably you buy a farm, if you buy an apartment house, if you buy a business, you're going to own it for 10 or 20 or 30 years. And the real question is has the 10-year or 20-year outlook for American businesses changed in the last 24 hours or 48 hours? And you'll notice many of the businesses we own, partially own, American Express, we've owned it for 20 years, Coca-Cola, we've owned it for 40 years. Those are businesses, and buy or sell your business based on today's headlines. And if it gives you a chance to buy something that you like, and you can buy it even cheaper, then you're good luck, basically.
Although there are a lot of people who look at the market and they say, look, I want to buy, but I don't want to buy when the market's sitting at new highs, when it's been hitting new records every day. Maybe it's off 800 points this morning, but maybe there's more of a decline to come because the effect of the coronavirus is going to be an impact on the global economy. IMF said that over the weekend. You are going to see weakness as not only China, but other countries try and address this. You're right, it may not change things over the 5 or 10 year span of things, but if I think that I can buy something for potentially 10% cheaper, maybe more than that if I wait a week or a month, maybe that's what I'm sitting around.
Well, if you think that, then you're going to get fabulously rich if you're right. All you have to do is just keep buying at 10-day intervals and keep taking your 10-day prediction. If I knew what the market was going to do, obviously, but you don't. I don't think anybody knows what the market's going to do. I think you do know whether you're making an intelligent purchase at a given price. Everybody, when they buy a stock, if you're going to buy, say, General Motors that has 1,400,000,000 shares out, you should be able to take a yellow pad like you have there, and on one page, let's say it's selling for 30. It isn't selling that low, but that'd be 42 billion. You should say, I am buying the General Motors company for $42 billion because, and you should get it on a piece of paper. And then if you want to have a separate piece of paper, it says, I think I know what the stock market's going to do, so I know whether it'll be higher or lower. But you don't have that.
But if I worry that the economy is going to slow down, not just for the quarter, but for the year, that would impact how many cars I think they might be able to sell or even produce.
I'll guarantee you cars are going to slow down someday. In 1932, General Motors had 19,000 dealers. That's more than all the auto dealers in the United States today. There are only 125 million people then, but they had 19,000 dealers. They produced or sold, and there was 1 month, I think, when they sold less than a tenth of a car, right at a tenth of a car per dealer. That was a terrific time to buy General Motors. and forget about the market. If you can predict the market, you don't need to read balance sheets. You don't need to read anything. You certainly can't predict the market by reading the daily newspaper. That is for sure. And you certainly can't predict the market by listening to me. But you're buying businesses. And if you had planned to buy a local service station yesterday and it was closing today, I don't think you'd tear your hair out or anything like that. You'd have already looked at where it was located and the contract it had with the suppliers and made a decision on competition. People, because they can make decisions every second in stocks, whereas they can't with farms, they think an investment in stocks is different than an investment in a business or an investment in a farm or investment in an apartment house. But it isn't. If you get your money's worth in terms of future earning power over the next 10 or 20 or 30 years, you're going to have made a good investment. And you can't pick them from day to day. If you can do that, you can, well, I haven't met anybody yet that knows how to do it.
You made a point of that in the letter this year, where you highlighted a book that was written by Edgar Lawrence Smith back in 1924. And you said until he came along, nobody really realized the compound interest effect of buying stocks, not just buying businesses, but buying stocks themselves.
Edgar Lawrence Smith changed the world with that book, and the people have forgotten all about it now. Although in the 1920s it became more and more gospel as the boom went on. But Edgar Lawrence Smith set out to write a book on bonds versus stocks. And he said he went in with the idea that bonds would be a better investment in times of deflation and stocks would be a better investment in times of inflation. And the first line of his book was to say that he'd been wrong. But he had enough sense to look at his evidence. I think Darwin said if you found evidence that was contrary to what you already believed, write it down in 30 minutes or your mind will just block it out. I mean, people have a great resistance to new evidence. And he said, if a stock yields 4% and a bond yields 4%, which was what he was talking about then, the stock was going to outperform the bond because there were retained earnings that were building beyond that yield. And that had been true for a long, long time, but nobody paid any attention to it. We don't get rich on our dividends that we receive, although we're happy to receive them. We get rich on the fact that the retained earnings are used to build new earning power, repurchase shares, which increases your ownership in the company. And Berkshire has retained earnings ever since we started. That's the only reason Berkshire's worth a lot more, as we retain earnings.
That led Keynes to actually say that this was an important book. People paid attention to it, but you're right, it added to the frenzy that built up to 1929.
Well, that is true, because you can get, old boss Ben Graham told me very early on, you get more trouble with a good idea than a bad idea, because the good idea works. I mean, it's a good idea to buy a home, for example, and then people go crazy sometimes. The good idea works, and it works, and it works. Stocks work out better than bonds most of the time. And after a while, people forget that there were some other limiting conditions. With Edgar Lawrence Smith's book, it was that when bonds yield the same as stocks, which was the case then, that stocks are going to outperform because they have this retained earnings. So stocks started going up in the 20s, and all of a sudden they were selling at 5 or 6 times the prices as when he bought the book. And the original correct perception on his part had experienced changing conditions, but people just looked, they got their confirmation through stock prices. And people, that's what happens in bull markets. People start out thinking stocks are cheap, and then they start thinking stocks have gone up. And a stock can be a good buy or a bad buy. A bond can be a good buy or a bad buy. It depends on price.
But that leads us to today. I mean, if his premise was that stocks are always going to be a better investment than bonds, that's kind of what you hear today, which we've been hearing for a while, is Tina, there is no alternative, right? You have to buy stocks because bond yields are so low, because interest rates are so low.
Well, if you look at the present situation, we've talked about this before, that you get more for your money in stocks than bonds. That doesn't have to be the case. I mean, but it's usually been the case in America, very usually been the case. And if you buy a 30-year bond today with a yield 2%, you're paying 50 times earnings for an investment where the earnings can't go up for 30 years. Now, if somebody said, I want to sell you a stock that's at 50 times earnings and the earnings can't go up for 30 years, you'd say that doesn't sound very good. Stocks are way better than 30-year bonds. I mean, that's clear. And that's one of the alternatives people have. People really have 3 basic alternatives: short-term cash, which is an option of doing something later on; long-term bonds, or long-term stocks. And stocks are cheaper than bonds.
Charlie said recently, Charlie Munger, vice chairman at Berkshire Hathaway, had his daily journal meeting just a couple of weeks ago. And at that meeting, he said that there's a lot of wretched excess out there and that there's a lot of trouble coming as a result. Do you agree with that?
There's always trouble coming. Yeah, there was trouble coming in 1942 when I bought that first stock. All kinds of trouble. Philippines were going to fall pretty soon. And there was all kinds of trouble in 1949. There was trouble, certainly trouble in 2008 when I wrote an article for the New York Times. I said trouble is coming, but I said buy stocks.
Would you repeat that this time? If trouble's coming, would you still say buy stocks right now?
I would say buy stocks if you get enough for your money. And, we buy a few stocks, but we don't look at, we're not buying the stock market. We're saying, I am buying, let's say American Express, we own American Express. There's 815 million shares out and sells it. This morning's 126 or something like that. So it's selling for roughly $100 billion. Now the real question is whether the company's worth more or less than $100 billion. It isn't what the stock is going to do tomorrow or next week or next month.
You said just a few minutes ago when we asked you on Worldwide Exchange, right now Berkshire Hathaway is a net buyer of stocks. You are in a net buying position?
We've been a net buyer of stocks, or I've actually been a personal net buyer of stocks ever since I was 11, every year. And there's been 15 American presidents in my lifetime, more than a third. I've lived under a third of the life. I didn't buy stocks under Hoover. I was only about 6 months old then, but there have been 7 Republicans after that and 7 Democrats. I bought stocks under every one of them. Now, I haven't bought stocks every day. There have been a few times I thought stocks were really quite high. And I've even written an article once or twice, but that's very seldom.
But you wrapped up your partnership at one point.
I wrapped up my partnership once.
Because you thought it was too expensive.
Yeah.
Okay. But this is not a time like that?
We own $240 billion worth of stocks. Now, we look at that as $240 billion worth of businesses that we own parts of. But I love owning those businesses.
You've also got more than $125 billion in cash sitting around.
Yeah, well, we'd like to buy more businesses.
We are here, Warren, with you at Berkshire Hathaway's headquarters building. This is upstairs in the room that's called the Cloud Room. And this is a room where you often take students to kind of talk to them about questions they have when they come to visit you. You also do some other things up here, too, other presentations.
Yeah, I had students there for dozens of years. And for many years, 40 schools would come in. They'd come in groups of 8. At 5 days, I'd spend a year, and they come from all over the world. We had them from Peru, we had them from China, we had them from Israel, and we had a good time always. I've given it up now, but I started teaching when I was 21, and when I got to about 88, I thought, I'll take a rest.
Well, there are a lot of questions that are coming in from viewers that have been hitting here today. They're waking up this morning looking at the stock market indicated down by almost 800 points for the Dow. We're actually off our worst levels of the morning, which is something to say when you're still looking at the Dow down by about 786 points. But people have a lot of questions about the economy. They're wondering what's happening right now, particularly with the coronavirus out there. You have a lot of economic data at your fingertips because not only on the many businesses that Berkshire owns, but the businesses you own pieces in. What are you seeing right now around the globe?
Well, it affects various businesses. I would say that I received commentary. I get some commentary monthly, but from almost all of the companies, and a good many of them had some comment about how it was affecting them, and however it was affecting them at that time, I'm sure it's accentuated. But they were affected by tariffs, they're affected by taxes, they're affected by, the most thing is they're affected by competitors and supply and demand over time. And I don't have the faintest idea what our businesses will be doing 6 months from now or 12 months from now. I do think that not only our businesses, but American business generally will be doing fabulously better 30 years from now, 20 years from now. And the long-term is in my view, is very easy to predict in a general way, but in an important way. I don't think there's any way to predict what the stock market will do 10 minutes from now, 10 days from now, or 10 months from now. So I work on what I think I'm able to do, and as desirable as it might be to know what was going to happen 10 minutes from now, that's just not something I'll ever be able to master. So fortunately, I can come to a pretty firm conclusion that 20 or 30 years from now, America business and probably over the world will be far better than it is now.
What are the momentary implications that you've seen from coronavirus? What's an example of a business?
Well, an example, for example, we have maybe 1,000 Dairy Queen franchises in China here, and they're just treat only, so they're the older type now with food. But a great number of them were closed, but the ones that were open weren't doing any business to speak of. And Apple is, our much bigger holding is Apple. We own 5.6% of Apple, and the company came out and said that it's affecting not only its stores, but all kinds of things, supply chain. And I find that certain of our companies have got supply chain arrangements that are being affected by this that I didn't even know had this.
Like what?
Well, I got one from Johns Manville the other day, for example. You wouldn't normally think of them as having a big supply chain, but Shaw Carpets, or you name it. I'll guarantee you that a very significant percentage of our business is one way are affected by, but they're being affected by a lot of other things too. And the real question is where are those businesses going to be in 5 or 10 years? They'll have ups and downs. Our candy business is a wonderful business, but it loses money 7 months out of the year. But the nice thing is Christmas comes every year.
When you look at the economy and how things were kind of chugging along, let's say beginning of this year,
Yeah.
when things first picked up, how would you gauge the U.S. economy at that point?
Well, it's strong, but a little softer than it was 6 months ago. But that's over a broad range of business. You look at car loadings, rail car loadings, that's moving goods around. And there again, that was affected by the tariffs too, because people front-ended purchases, all kinds of things, always a lot of variables. But the business is down, but it's down from a very good level. So I would say that looking at our 70 businesses, and that actually, they represent hundreds in addition, they're a little softer. On the other hand, I was out with the fellows from the Nebraska Furniture Mart just Saturday night, and their business was up quite a bit in February, but that's because weather was good. So you have a lot of variables that hit.
Why do you think business was down, let's say, the last 6 months? Is it a decline in confidence, or is it coming off of levels where there was unusual activity ahead of that?
Well, it isn't really down. It's just it leveled off and a little softer maybe now. But, well, tariffs, the tariff situation was a big question mark for all kinds of companies, and still is to some degree. But that was front and center for a while. Now coronavirus is front and center. Something else will be front and center 6 months from now, and a year from now, and 2 years from now. The real question is where are these businesses going to be 5 and 10 and 20 years from now? Some of them will do sensationally, some of them will disappear, and overall, I think America will do very well. It has since 1776.
But you still watch things like rail car loadings very closely.
I watch everything, but I don't do it to make specific investment decisions. But I enjoy. I mean, I want to know what's going on, but I also don't think that I can make money by predicting what's going to go on next week or next month. I do think I can make money by predicting what's going to happen in 10 years.
All right, well, tell us more about what's going on, just since you like knowing about those things.
Well, as I said, the certain businesses depend on weather to quite an extent in retail, for example, in given months. But the big trends you see are going on. I mean, in terms of the movement to online commerce, and I mean, the big stuff keeps moving. But we've got a big investment in the airline business, and I just heard, even more flights are canceled and all that. But flights are canceled for weather. It so happens in this case they're going to be canceled for longer because of coronavirus. But if you own airlines for 10 or 20 years, you're going to have some ups and downs in current business, and some of them will be weather related, and they can be all kinds of things. The real question is how many passengers are they going to be carrying 10 years from now and 15 years from now, and what will margins be, and what will the competitive position be? But I still look at the figures all the time. I'll admit that.
You mentioned the airlines, and you own stakes in all the major airlines, but not as much as Delta. I think you own north of 11% of Delta at this point?
No.
Right.
Our largest position is in Delta. 3 of the 4 positions are mine. One of the positions is one of the other fellows, the 4 positions. But we own a very roughly close to 10% of the 4 largest airlines.
There's been a lot of speculation. In fact, some of the questions that came in over this weekend were questions about those airlines, wondering if you would buy any of them outright. Have you considered buying any of those companies outright?
It'd be very unlikely we would do that. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's complicated.
Why?
Well, for one thing, they're regulated, and there's an interplay. I'll just give you an example, not that we'd be doing, but with Delta, we own 18% of American Express, and American Express is a bank holding company, and bank holding companies have limits as to what they can do, and a passive holder of a bank holding company with American Express, but then if we owned an airline that was tied up with them, they'd have lots of arrangements. There's a lot of complications because it's a regulated industry. Anytime you get in a regulated industry, you have more complications in transactions.
So is it fair to say you like these stocks and you would own more if it wasn't complicated?
Well, if to go beyond 15% in any company, we would have to go in on Hart-Scott-Rodino. I mean, there's a lot of rules as you increase your ownership. Obviously, almost anything we own, we'd like to own more of.
Are you buying more of any of those stakes right now? Apple shares?
I get pretty close-mouthed when it comes to what we're buying.
You thought about that for
I
a
feel my
second.
jaws lock up.
But fair to say,
it's fair to say that anything that we own, we like. There's very few stocks that we own, and I look at them as part ownerships in businesses. There's very few that are selling at some price where I would sell them a little higher.
all right, well, let me ask a question that came from Tony Dickinson. He said, in the fourth quarter, Berkshire sold 55 million shares of Wells Fargo. Should shareholders view this as a lack of confidence in the new CEO turnaround plan, and what is Warren's future outlook for Wells Fargo?
Well, I won't give him any advice specifically on Wells Fargo, but it's absolutely true that we've sold down our position. Some of it was sold down to avoid being over 10%, because then you do have some filings with the Fed and so on. But
You've sold well more than that.
Yeah, we've sold well more than that.
Yeah, I think 8.4% was the last.
Yeah, that sounds right. And we sold Wells Fargo in the fourth quarter, and we sold it earlier.
Can I ask why? Only because I did get a number of questions.
I can understand that, but we just don't want to give any advice on what we're doing, because I could change what I'm doing. We talk about everything except we don't give stock advice.
Okay. I'll try one more from Tony Dickinson, just because I think I got 15 or 20 different questions on this. Berkshire owns $32.58 billion of Bank of America and $17.39 billion of Wells Fargo. One position's been increasing while the other's been decreasing. Does Warren like Bank of America twice as much as Wells Fargo? And how should shareholders view the holdings?
Yeah, well, I think they've seen that we bought Bank of America and we've sold some Wells Fargo.
All right, let me ask you a broader question that comes in just on interest rates and the impact that might have as well. Varun Jain writes in on Facebook, hi, I'm a huge fan and a student of Mr. Buffett. Please ask him, what impact does the zero interest rate environment across places like Japan and Europe have on their banks, whether the business is still good, and does the prolonged low interest rate regime in the United States hurt the prospects of American banks like JP Morgan, etc.? And in such circumstances, do Indian banks, which have high return on equity, look attractive to Mr. Buffett?
Yeah, well, I can't comment on that. But generally speaking, but there are a lot of other variables too. But the banks are going to make more money if there are higher rates with a steeper curve. The curve is more important. In other words, the 10-year versus short-term rates may make more difference than the absolute level. But American banks have made very good money with very low interest rates. Around the world, if you look in the UK or Europe or Japan, even lower rates have made it pretty tough for banks. The returns on equity are not as high, and they have to use more leverage to even get the same returns, and I don't like that as well.
If you are talking about the curve that we're looking at this morning, the 5-year, 2-year is inverted. 2-year 10 is not right now, but the 10-year is below 1.4% this morning.
And think about it, the 10-year at 1.4%, that means you're paying 70 times earnings for something that can't increase its earnings for 10 years.
Okay,
now, if somebody came to you with a stock and said, this is a terrific stock, it sells at 70 times earnings, and the earnings can't go up for 10 years. You'd say, well, explain that to me again.
Right.
But no, we've never seen a situation like this in the world, literally. I mean, you can go back and read Keynes, and you can read Adam Smith, and you can read, all the great ones. And they don't talk about negative interest rate. It never costs their mind. With supply and demand, all these marginal costs. But brilliant economists never really anticipated that you would have negative. You've got 13 trillion or something like that worldwide at negative interest rates, and we don't know what that means. And if we've got a lot of people who can speculate what it means, but 10 years from now or 15 years from now, we'll look back and say, well, it's obvious what would happen under that, and we'll see it. But it is not a normal situation, and well, interest rates are the basis of all value. I mean, if you knew interest rates were going to be zero for 100 years, you would think 1% was a great rate of return. But you also would know if you bought something that was yielding 1%, or that was what it paid, and rates went to 8%, you'd lose practically all your capital. So it's an enormous factor, and we don't know the answer. Central banks don't know the answer. All we know is that it's been useful in stimulating things, and particularly asset prices, now for 10 years. And what we thought was temporary in 2008 and 9 in the way of monetary policy to stimulate, we've just put our foot on the gas even further. The whole world has.
You made a point in the letter of saying that you don't know how long these interest rates will last. You and Charlie never try and figure these things out. But we did have St. Louis Fed President Jim Bullard on the program last week, and he said that he expects to see these low interest rates for a long time to come. That does raise a lot of questions, if that happens, about what this means for the stock market, what that means for banks, what that means for insurance companies, which you touched on in the letter too.
It's bad for insurance companies, but it's good for stocks.
Bad for insurance companies, and what happens to the insurance companies as a result? Are they getting more?
Well,
are some insurance companies kind of pushing out risk?
The ones that really get hurt on it are either life or annuity companies that have promised returns. The property casualty business doesn't promise returns. It still holds money, so it hurts them. But if you promise somebody an annuity that's going to pay them 3 or 4%, and now you find that you're reinvesting your money at 1% or something, you're going to disappear.
Are insurance companies being forced to make riskier and riskier bets?
Well, they shouldn't be. I mean, the answer, if you need to get 3% and you're only getting 1%, the answer is to quit giving 3%. It's not to try and get the 1 up to 3 and do more dangerous things. You should always adapt your consumption to your income. You shouldn't try and adjust your income to your consumption. That's a basic principle for individuals, businesses, and everything else. And reaching for yield is really stupid, but it's very human. I mean, and I understand it. And people say, well, I've saved all this money all my life and now I can only get 1% out. What do I do? And the answer is you learn to live on 1%, unfortunately. And you don't go and listen to some salesman come along and tell you, I've got some magic way to get you 5%.
Do you think, though, that's what should be happening? Do you think that there is more risk taking place in the insurance market as a result?
And you see that in what they call leverage loans and weaker covenants and all. No, people are reaching for yield. There's no question about that, and that's stupid. And it has consequences over time. But it's very human.
Consequences that could have a big market impact.
Depends how far it goes. Yeah. It's something that things that get built in slowly, people going crazy in tech companies in the late 1990s, it can take a lot longer than you think. Mm-hmm. But eventually you get to midnight and everything turns to pumpkins and mice.
You know, that's the downside of low interest rates, pensions, savers, anybody who gets left in a raw position of that. On the alternate side of things, if rates were to rise rapidly, or maybe not even so rapidly, what does that mean for the federal debt?
Well, it depends on the average maturity of the debt, but our maturities are fairly short. They've gotten lengthened a little. But if you take 20 trillion and you're borrowing at 2%, you've got 400. What have you got? 2 trillion to 200 billion. You got 40 billion of the expense. But if it goes to 5%, you got 100 billion of expense. I mean, at 5%, you got a trillion of expense. I'm sorry. We are benefiting enormously in our national budget by the fact that interest rates are very low. And so interest cost has not gone up as you would have anticipated if you were looking at the scene 20 or 30 years ago with the increase in national debt. Austria issued 100-year bonds, at 2% or thereabouts, and then they've gone way, way up. And I think maybe they yield 1.1 or something like that. I don't know where they are now. But it's great if you're a borrower to have cheap money. I mean, everybody should refinance their mortgage.
Is that an argument for the Federal Reserve, or I'm sorry, for the Treasury Department here, issuing longer notes?
Well, yeah, but I would have said the same thing 5 or 6 years ago and been wrong. But if we, under the present slope, it still would cost more to lengthen it out. But you're lengthening it out at very, very low rates, and it would be what I would be inclined to do if I were Secretary of Treasury, but I'd have missed a lot of bets in the last 10 years too.
Warren, again, for people who are just waking up, they're tuning in and they want to know what you think about this sell-off this morning. To see the Dow down 700, 800 points in the morning, what's your reaction when you see something like that? Well, my reaction is that I like to buy stocks, so I don't wish ill on anybody else, but I like to, if they want to sell them to me cheaper, I prefer it. So if that's a roughly a 3% decline or thereabouts. I don't know how many 3% declines I've had in my lifetime, but there have been a lot of them. And I can't think of one that you shouldn't have bought on. Basically, that doesn't mean stocks are going to go up or down next week or next month or next year. But if there's something, if you like to own American businesses, you're getting a chance to buy it 3% cheaper. I don't consider that a lot cheaper. I mean, but how can it be bad news unless you have to sell stocks? Now, if you have to sell them for some reason, you're worse off. If you don't have to sell them, I mean, somebody can come around and offer you a quote on your house today, and it could be 2% less than they offered you yesterday. But if you like the house, it doesn't make any difference to you. Does that mean Berkshire will be buying stocks today?
Well, we certainly won't be selling, and yeah, we could easily be buying something, sure.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about a Barron's cover story that was just out last week. The good news on the cover story is they think the Berkshire is worth more than it's selling for right now. The bad news is they said they think that's in part because it's got a big conglomerate discount, and they think if you weren't running it, that it might get broken up. What's your response to that line of logic?
Well, conglomerates have had a bad name, and for good reason over the years. I mean, I closed my partnership up at the end of the 1960s, and there was a very abusive run in conglomerates where they played with numbers and they had dirty pooling, as they called it, of accounting. They wanted to have their stocks up and put out stories to do it so they could issue more stock. They were kind of chain letter arrangements. There've been a lot of bad conglomerates, and probably disproportionately so compared to sort of honest to God single industry businesses over time. We don't think we're that kind of a conglomerate. We've certainly never wanted to issue shares. We've never touted shares. And it's done for business reasons in our case. The interesting thing is, of course, is the American public has been going wild in their enthusiasm for conglomerates in the last few years, if you think about it. I mean, it's been an incredibly popular area, but they call them index funds. Oh. You buy 500 businesses.
Trying to figure out what you were talking
about. Yeah, well, 500 businesses all put together. I mean, that's the ultimate conglomerate, isn't it? I mean, I've recommended index funds to lots of people, and when they do it, they're buying into 500 businesses. And they're going to have 500 businesses a year from now and 5 years from now, and they think that group of businesses will do very well, and I think our group of businesses will do okay.
The difference with an S&P 500 index is it's 500 different companies run by 500 different management teams who are all focused on their business, maybe not having a centralized operation that is loosely running all of those businesses.
Well, our businesses are run by separate people. I mean, we just finished Valentine's Day, and I did not select what pieces went in the boxes, and it's probably been 10 years at least since I've been to a See's Candy factory now. I get the figures every month, but I don't know how to make chocolate. Anything of the sort. I don't pick out the new locations. We have managers for our businesses that are very much like the managers we have for the businesses that we own pieces of, like American Express or Coca-Cola, and there's a couple things we can do. We can determine the dividend policy of our subsidiaries. We can control their capital allocation to some extent, but on most capital allocation, whether to buy new equipment or anything like that, they make the decision. The BNSF Railroad is going to spend $3.5 billion on. I don't approve a single dollar of that in terms of capital expenditures. They know what they need to do, where they need to lay track, how many locomotives they need, whatever it may be. So our managers are, I would say in a sense, they're almost more independent than the managers of the S&P 500 who go around and report to Wall Street week after week. They get an investor relations meeting and they're always explaining what they're doing and trying to get the approval of the analysts and all that sort of thing. And we just tell our managers to do what makes sense.
Okay, outside of the idea of them not having to report to individual shareholders or the investment community, what's the advantage of having it there? The capital allocation part of it?
Well, we can move capital within. If you move capital from one stock to another, and you got a gain, particularly, I mean, you pay a tax and may pay a dividend tax, or if you sell, but there's a lot of taxes incurred in moving from one business to another, either at the corporate level, in some cases, but certainly at the individual level. And we can move capital. Well, just take See's Candy again. We bought that in 1972. We've moved several $1 billion from the candy business to other types of businesses. And we'd love it if we could use it all in the candy business, but it just isn't that sort of business. And in addition to that, we free up our managers from all dealing with Wall Street, dealing with bankers, dealing with all kinds of things that are what I regard as less productive use of their time.
However, you also have a situation where you have gotten some activists who have been interested in the stock, including Bill Ackman. He's built up a stake, hasn't said too much about it, but I think he has made some comments about how maybe Burlington Northern Santa Fe's margins could be improved. You can look back at Bill Ackman's experience with the Canadian Pacific Railway and kind of wonder if he is building up a position because he would like to see you take a more active role there.
Well, we notice what other railroads earn and when their margins are better. I mean, and we certainly put way less pressure on than Wall Street might, who would want it next week. But our managers are well aware of what's going on in other industries, and we've made changes where we don't think some businesses are performing as well as they should. But overwhelmingly, we've got managers there that are very, very good. They've got capital available to them for anything that makes sense. And we decide how much they distribute, where the capital moves, and sometimes it moves from one industry to another. And in certain industries, a consolidated tax position really is very helpful to us.
There's a viewer question that came in from Ben Compston, and he asks, it was recently pointed out by Bill Ackman that some subsidiaries like Geico, BNSF, lag their peers in some areas. Would you agree with that? And how can your successor push improvement in subsidiaries while maintaining a decentralized management structure?
Well, at Geico, we bought control in 1995. We had about 2.5% of the market for auto insurance, and we're at about 13.7% of the market. So we've gone from $2.5 billion of premium volume or thereabouts to $35 billion of premium volume. We're number 2 now to State Farm. We were number 6 or 7 at that time. So I would say that not due to Berkshire at all, but due to Tony Nicely during almost all those years. Geico's been the envy of every other company in the auto insurance business, except for Progressive, but they've done a good job too. But Geico is worth tens and tens and tens of billions more than when we bought it, in addition to all the earnings we've given, just the goodwill value side. That's been extraordinarily well run. And with Burlington, I think we paid a dividend of $5 billion last year, and we paid $35 billion for it. So it's gained in market share in its business. Its operating margins have improved, but they haven't improved as much as some other railroads.
Do you believe in precision scheduling railroading?
Well, we'll see. I mean, we watched it plenty, and
And for those who don't know what that is, it's something that kind of irritates customers because it makes things a little more rigid, but it doesn't.
Yeah, it makes the customers adapt to the railroad more than the railroad adapting to the customers. And practically everybody's done it. And a fellow named Hunter Harrison was enormously successful.
Who worked with Bill Ackman at the Canadian Pacific.
Yeah, he worked with the BNSF, if you go back far enough. And there's a book about him. It's very interesting. But he did it at the Illinois Central, the Canadian National, the Canadian Pacific, and then he was going over to the CSX. He developed a method of railroading where the customer does adapt more to the railroad, and it improved margins dramatically. Our margins are close to what the better railroads, well, there's only a few, they get from precision railroading. On the other hand, we've gained share.
Because the customers don't like
because the railroads apparently, or the railroad customers like us better. And over the long term, we'll see. But it isn't like it's something we can't do.
And here's the latest on the coronavirus. China reported an additional 150 deaths and 409 new cases overnight. South Korea raised its coronavirus alert to the highest level after the number of cases there ballooned from 31 to more than 750 in less than a week. Stocks in Asia falling overnight. Hong Kong's Hang Seng fell 1.8%. South Korea's Kospi fell nearly 3.9%. Shares of South Korea's two largest airlines down as they canceled flights to the city of Daegu, where many of the new cases were detected. Meantime, Italy's government is scrambling to deal with the biggest outbreak of the coronavirus outside of Asia. Stocks there were lower overnight. The government placed at least 10 towns in northern Italy under quarantine and canceled the last few days of the Venice Carnival. Elsewhere in Italy, schools, museums, universities, and cinemas were closed, and major soccer matches were canceled. At this point, I mean, Boris Johnson out earlier today, Andrew, saying that the risk to UK citizens just over there remains low. I would say that our officials would say that here too. The risk to the U.S. citizens remains low. But there's a significant difference between supply chain disruption slowing dozens and dozens and actually hundreds of companies.
Absolutely.
And that's dampening global growth. What worries me is that we don't know 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. If it ever gets to the point where we start to see in a lot of countries around the world these breakouts where they don't even know the origin of some of these, and if they multiply like that, that's when I think it could really get. At this point, it's still a global growth slowdown. Nobody in most of the world is worried that they're going to catch coronavirus, and they can't go out and they can't go to the movies or the health club or to a restaurant. But that I just wonder. We don't know.
There are major travel that's being changed right now. Conferences are being canceled. There was an article in Time magazine speculating whether the Olympics in Japan over the summer will be canceled. So there's real implications here that could reverberate. Having said that, the farther we get to the spring, the better it gets in terms of weather. There's a whole sort of view about how the flu,
I was looking at some of Jim's tweets earlier. If you go too far with the fear and the panic, you're accused of one thing. If you don't go far enough, you're accused of the other thing. So we really just need to sit here and each day report on the facts and try to remain detached. But there's something about a pandemic that just is different than other black swans. It's a frightening prospect. Anyway, let's get right back to our guest of the morning. Warren Buffett joins Becky in Omaha following the release of his annual letter to shareholders over the weekend. Becky, you took a plane. I mean, it's in the back of our minds, is it not? It's just in the back. There's no way. And the risks are low.
So it goes back to 1918. It goes back to 1918. If you look at the numbers of what happened in that pandemic when it came around the globe, up to 50 million people were killed in that. It was a third of the planet's population that was infected. It was 500 million people that were infected at that point. 675,000 Americans died at that point. So inevitably, your mind kind of goes back to what's happened in the past, because as humans, we always look back to history to try and predict the future. It doesn't always work. It's not always prophetic, but it does give you something of what to kind of play out if this were to get worse and worse. Now, Andrew brought up the idea that it's warm weather. We're approaching spring in a lot of parts of the country, or a lot of parts of the planet. That may be good news. We just don't know if this time around, if this is one of those viruses that does die off in warmer weather. Wait and see and kind of hope.
Yeah, actually, I think there's, from what I've heard from people that know a lot more about viruses than I do, that unfortunately this will make it through the summer, and in terms of having a vaccine, it's a long ways off. So you've got it is scary stuff. I don't think it should affect what you do in stocks, but in terms of the human race, it's scary stuff when you have a pandemic.
Yeah, I guess this one's particularly frightening because it's new. So there's no natural immunity that's built up in any of the populations, and you wonder what happens, particularly in areas where there's not the same healthcare structure that we have in America or in some of the developed nations. I guess that's a big part of the question too.
Yeah, and it's well, I think about it in terms of our annual meeting. I mean, which is May 2nd. I mean, it could very well affect by that time. It could affect.
We got questions from viewers asking just that. Will the annual meeting be any different this year, particularly because you have a large Chinese contingency of shareholders who
I don't think.
that?
Yeah, and that certainly will be affected. And incidentally, I mean, flu is particularly tough on old people. If you're going to have two guys on the stage whose combined age is 185, so we won't be looking for people that are showing any signs of contagion. But that's one of the problems with this, is it does have a long gestation period,
Right.
And it's highly transmissible.
And again, you did talk about it earlier. It's something that you see in the results of the businesses, even some of your own fully owned businesses that you didn't anticipate.
Well, and we own airlines, for example. No, it affects businesses. Now, actually, my dad used to tell me stories. He was 14 in 1918, and he told me what went on in Omaha, during the big Spanish flu epidemic. I mean, it was something in those days, and pandemics will occur in the future. Now, what they hope to get is a universal flu vaccine, but that's a long way off. It isn't impossible. I mean, I asked my own science advisor is Bill Gates, so I talked to him. I call him. I've talked to him the last few days about it, and he's bullish on the long-term outlook for a universal prevention of it. But he says they're not going to come. It's not going to be here in 10 years.
What are Bill's concerns as somebody who spends a lot of time traveling around the globe, as somebody who is trying to help medicine in some of the less developed parts of the world?
Yeah, the Gates Foundation is very active in trying to be helpful on this, and Bill says the CDC is the best in the world, and I mean, we've got terrific resources in this country, but a pandemic is a pandemic, and there's just no evaluating. But I have heard that the summer is not likely to cause the end of this.
Do you know why?
But I don't know, and you shouldn't be asking. I shouldn't be offering my opinion on that, because I pass along things I hear from people I think are smart, but
I'm actually asking for Bill's opinion, not yours.
well, I shouldn't really quote him, but I do. He's the guy I asked, and I did talk to one just a few days ago, and he loves to talk science, and he can make it so I can understand it, which is quite a trick. At the Gates Foundation, they're taking it very seriously. I'll put it that way.
Is money going from the Gates Foundation to try and find a vaccine?
I'm sure we are expending human and financial resources.
I mean, maybe this is more than you know, but do you know if they have put human resources out either into China or other places where there's...
I don't know that. I don't want to comment on that, but I know that that is something they've always spent. They've been very involved in is human health, and even particularly this. But Bill knows a lot about vaccines.
Let's talk a little bit about Berkshire Hathaway. We were in the middle of a conversation when we had to go to a break before, but there has been this question raised, not only by Barron's in the cover story there, but by other places too, about whether Berkshire Hathaway would be worth more if it were split up.
It's a good question, and I will tell you that if you were to say, and let's say the stock market didn't change for 2 years and interest rates didn't change, so you had a 2-year period and you said, we'll sell off all the businesses.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, you have the expenses of selling them. Now, if you sold them all to people who leveraged them up to their maximum, you might get little more than the stock is selling for, it would be very tax inefficient. Very tax inefficient. Interestingly enough, up till 1986, it wouldn't have been. I mean, there was a general utilities doctrine that governed corporate breakups, and so you could dispose of businesses or securities if you did it right. You could dispose of securities or businesses that had appreciated without a tax at the corporate level. That was done regularly in various ways up till 1986. They revised the tax code big time. They killed general utilities. You can't do that now. Now you can have spin-offs, this business or that business. You probably have to lie a little in terms of your purpose in order to get the best tax ruling. And it takes time, but you cannot break up, you cannot dispose of the entire business, business by business, without having very substantial tax liability. It would not produce a gain. On the other hand, having them together produces, there's some very valuable synergies in there. Now, we don't use leverage as much as the people who would buy them piece by piece would do. So we could leverage Berkshire up to the sky. I've promised people we won't, because we have insurance promises to people out 50 or 100 years, and we've got shareholders who are going to own the stock for 50 years, and they do not want us to leverage to the sky. But there would not be a profit if we were simply to announce that over the next 24 months that you could come in and buy any business we had and we'd sell them to the highest bidder.
You made a point of talking about this in the annual letter. You said, key to my Berkshire-only institutions is my faith in the future judgment and fidelity of Berkshire directors. They will regularly be tested by Wall Streeters bearing fees. At many companies, these super salesmen might win. I do not, however, expect this to happen.
That's exactly true. And I think by writing it, it helps a little too. No, there's no question that Wall Street would love to come along and sell anything that we've got. I mean, there's a fee every time that there's a transaction, and they're big fees, and there's fees for financing. I mean, so we've had all kinds of people snoop around that. And they know they're not getting it done with me, but it won't get done later on either. I am leaving every share of Berkshire I have goes to charity, and it's 99% of my net worth. So nobody cares more than I do about getting the most money to those philanthropies over the years following my death. And that's going to take place over 15 years, and I say keep it all in Berkshire. But if I thought that it was going to be run in a way responsive to Wall Street, I would instead do something else and have the money distributed to these philanthropies and not have it all tied to Berkshire. But Berkshire has a very unusual shareholder base. I mean, we have individuals that own Berkshire, and a lot of them have owned it 50 years just like it. It's people buy it to own for lifetime, and we're going to run it in a way that they won't be disappointed in.
Do you think the people who are relatively newer shareholders buying the B shares have the same mentality as the people who have been in it for 50 years in the A?
Well, we try to, because that's who we encourage. I mean, in effect, we don't want everybody to buy our stock. I mean, there's only so many seats. There's about 1,600,000 and some thousand A shares out. All the seats are filled. I love the shareholders we have. I don't want to go to Wall Street and try and get some new shareholders. They're going to replace the people we have. So what we want to have is people in those seats that are in sync with us. You can run a French restaurant or you can run a hamburger stand. And if you serve good hamburgers, you'll do good business at the hamburger stand. You can, at the French restaurant, you do the same thing there. But you can't run the French restaurant and then serve hamburgers inside. And you can't run the hamburger stand and serve French food inside. So we advertise in our deeds, in our words, in every way we can what we're about. And we're looking to have the seats filled in our church by people who are in sync with us. And we do have them there. We get the same people every Sunday. And I see no advantage in going out and telling everybody in Wall Street we're going to do wonderful things and having those seats replaced, because the only way you can get a seat is to throw somebody else out of that seat. There's only so many seats and they're all full, and you want them filled with people who are in sync with the policies of the company, and therefore you have to explain those policies and you have to live up to those policies, and for 55 years we've tried to.
So you get the shareholders you deserve.
Exactly.
All right, not to mix metaphors, but can you have a decentralized central office running both the French restaurant and the hamburger place?
Well, they aren't trying. We're not trying to have the railroad management run the utility or anything.
They were decentralized. That's what I mean. A decentralized headquarters that's in charge, a conglomerate in charge of all those different businesses.
Well, we could run. We have decentralized management as it is. We could have somebody in charge of all the little companies, another one for the big. We could visualize it in all kinds of ways. I think we'd have more overhead. I think we'd have a different sort of manager. Our managers like running their own businesses, and they never have to finance their businesses. I mean, they never have to go to Wall Street. They probably save 25% of their time, and I want them to feel they own their businesses, and that's all they're responsible for. If we mess up some other way, they get paid based on how they do, and there again, we attract managers who like to operate on that basis. We don't attract managers, particularly who think they're going to keep moving step by step through various divisions and eventually run the whole place.
One of the things that people wrote in, a lot of people had questions about the banks, about what's happening with the banks, what you've changed with some of your investments over time. Jason Goldberg writes in, he says, please ask Warren about his views on the bank stocks in general and on Wells Fargo in particular. Over the last 2 quarters, he sold almost a quarter of his longstanding Wells Fargo stake. Also in the fourth quarter, he dumped a third of his Goldman Sachs shares, although he still owns over $75 billion in bank equities. So what do you think about banks? Not necessarily the sell-off today because you don't look at day by day.
Well, banking is a good business if you don't do dumb things on the asset side. I mean, basically. And it's a business that the banks we own earn between, the commercial banks earn between 12% and 16% or so on net tangible assets. That's a good business. It's a fantastic business against the long-term bond, at 2%. If you have a choice between a 2% instrument and a 12% instrument, which one's going to win over time? So if you ask me whether I think banks are going to go down where they only earn 3 or 4% on tangible assets, I don't think that will happen. The question is really whether they do something massively dumb. I mean, which periodically a number of banks have done, and I feel very good about the banks we own. They're very attractive compared to most other securities I see, and most of them are buying. Bank of America is buying in a lot of stock every year. So our ownership of the Bank of America this year probably will go up 7 or 8% without us spending a dime. I'd like to own any business, any good business where my ownership goes up 7 or 8% every year without me spending any money, and on top of it, I get a dividend. So they're very attractive, both against interest rates and against or against bonds and against other stocks, in my view.
You say occasionally they do dumb things. Maybe you're talking about Wells Fargo with the scandal that it had. It just settled on Friday with a number of the regulatory institutions that were kind of looking into it, the investigations that were taking place for $3 billion.
Yeah.
Does this mean that they have kind of finally gotten through that and can move forward?
I don't know the answer to that. I know that they made $3 billion because it was nuts. I don't know what else is outstanding. But Wells Fargo is classic in terms of one lesson. My partner, Charlie Munger, he says, whenever we have a problem, you attack it immediately. He says an ounce of prevention is not worth a pound of cure. An ounce of prevention is worth a ton of cure. And we've seen that time after time. And the interesting thing, and I don't know the details at all, but the original thing was a whole bunch of phony accounts. Now, I don't know how, if you open up a couple million phony accounts, you make any money out of it at all. I mean, the shareholders didn't make money. People say that, well,
the incentive structure was set up so that some of the employees
didn't make much money. It was the dumbest incentive system you can think. And as soon as you learn, you can devise dumb incentive systems. We've done them ourselves. I mean, you can cause people to do the wrong thing because they will do what they're incented to do. And they had obviously a very dumb incentive system. People started playing it in various ways. And the big thing is they ignored it when they found out about it. I mean, you're going to do dumb things in business, and we do them every day, But you absolutely have to attack a problem as soon as it occurs, and you know about it. And if that had happened, Wells Fargo shareholders would be a lot better off. But Wells Fargo shareholders did not profit from opening up accounts that were phony accounts that had nothing in them. I mean, somebody was getting paid so much per account. And the practice spread, because bad practices do spread if they're allowed to spread, and they were ignored, which is a total disaster. And look at the consequences. So 2 or 3 years later, who's paying? The shareholders are paying for something that didn't do them any good whatsoever.
Is that why you've sold off some of the shares?
No, not specifically.
I know you don't want to get specific on why.
Yeah, no, I'm not recommending it. What stocks, people have to make up their own minds on that. But,
Okay. I want to ask you a question about Todd Combs and his new role at GEICO. I got several questions that came in from that, and let's just use this one from Peter Lampros. During last year's interview on CNBC, after the 2018 letter was released, you were asked about succession at GEICO, and you mentioned that at a recent meeting at GEICO, you met about 40 of their top executives, and after each introduced themselves, they stated their length of time with the company. The shortest was 19 years. Please explain why none of these 40 top executives were qualified to take over as CEO after the retirement of Bill Roberts. Again, that's Pete Lampros from Chicago.
Yeah, Bill Roberts took over not even 2 years ago, and he has done a terrific job in connection with Tony Nicely. I mean, GEICO is my first love, absolutely. I tell the other companies that you can compete for my second love, but you can't compete for my first love, which is GEICO, because it goes back 69 years, and it did wonders for me. Anyway, GEICO, Bill Roberts took over a little less than 2 years ago, and then in either October or November last year, he said he'd like to retire in a year. He would adjust it in any way that made it the easiest for us. And we did not have the person, in my view, to replace him at that point. And Todd Combs, who's worked with Berkshire now for 10 years, he actually was a product manager at Progressive in the past, and he knows a lot about insurance. Insurance is probably the only business I know something about that we're in. All the rest of them are full of confusion. But I understand the insurance business to some degree. Todd understands it very well at the operating level. And so Todd is there, and I hope very much that he's not there very long, because I'd like to get him back to Omaha. But our intention always is to promote from within, and we would hope to pick out the right person at GEICO. It isn't that there isn't somebody there, it's just you want to have the right one, because when you put somebody in, you're going to keep them there for a long time, and or her. And
does that suggest Todd is not going to be there for a long time?
I don't think he's going to. No, the plan is not for him to be. I mean, he has not made a permanent career shift, I don't know how long he'll be there. We have one important problem, which is which all insurance companies have, but Progressive has done a better job of managing correlating or risk with rate, and that is what we're focused on now.
Correlating risk with rate.
In other words, having the proper rate.
Right, charging the right amount.
Charging the right amount. If you were in the life insurance business and you thought that 80-year-olds had the same life expectancy as 20-year-olds, you'd have a big problem. And what would happen is you'd write all the 80-year-olds and somebody would write all the 20-year-olds. So in auto insurance, the same thing. There's a vast difference.
In auto insurance, I'm not sure. I might prefer the 80-year-olds over the 20-year-olds.
Well, you might, and you certainly would prefer the 80-year-olds to the 16-year-olds. I mean, and you prefer the 16-year-old female to the 16-year-old male. There's a whole bunch of things. So you've got to you really got to segment risks, and that's enormously important. And every company's trying to do it better all the time. We do it far better than we did 50 years ago, but we have room for improvement on that. We're focused on that, and in the meantime, we're growing faster. We're gaining market share. GEICO is a fantastic asset. Todd's job is to focus on that, but it's also to work himself out of a job very, very quickly, and preferably to work definitely preferably to work himself out of a job with somebody from Geico.
Eric LaFont writes a follow-up question. He says, Warren, why did you and Ajit decide to appoint Todd Combs as the CEO of Geico? That part you've answered, but how will he be able to run Geico, manage a $13 billion investment portfolio, oversee Haven, and be on the board of JP Morgan?
Yeah, well, it'll keep him busy. And we've told him he's unlimited use of the NetJets.
Really?
Oh, sure. No, I mean, we want him to be efficient. That's what NetJets is for. And he'll be working 70-hour weeks. The question about the portfolio is interesting. Most months, neither Ted nor Todd makes a single change in their portfolio. I mean, portfolio management is something that you learn over decades. And when I ran Solomon, I was running Berkshire's portfolio. It is not something that you have to sit there day by day and do. People do it that way, but if there are many years where if I just left the portfolio entirely the same and didn't make any changes, we'd be better off. So that's not about. But you're right in terms of JP Morgan's board, and he's going to be a very busy guy. Geico's the top priority, but it isn't going to stay the top priority for a long time.
All right, let me run to another question that Max0205 wrote in. Have Todd Combs and Ted Weschler outperformed the S&P 500 since they began working at Berkshire? Why don't you disclose their record? Why don't you disclose their record, they said.
Well, we're not disclosing. I think it would be very unusual for a firm to disclose everybody's sales last year among their salespeople or anything like that. I mean, they're entitled to work in relative anonymity. Our directors know how they do. I know how they do. We made a lot of money with them. I feel very good. I feel very good about them in all ways. But we're not going to tell you how much each candy store sells. It's See's Candy, or who was the top person at any place bought in sales or whatever it may be.
All right, let's jump to Berkshire's overall record versus the S&P. Berkshire has now underperformed the S&P 500 on 1-year, 3-year, 5-year, and 10-year marks.
Yeah.
Is that because it's too big, and will it ever be able to outperform the
Well, certainly being too big is part of it. But I would say this. During that same time, I mean, last year, we achieved, now I don't like it, GAAP earnings very well, but we achieved the highest GAAP earnings of any company in the world has ever achieved. It's investor-owned. And we have the highest net worth of any company in the world, investor-owned, any company in the world. So I would say, related to safety of principal over time, I feel good about it. And I feel good about the fact that 99% of my money's in it, and that it will be the source of all the philanthropic contributions that are made for 15 or dozen years after I die. So, but I do not think it will be in the top 10% of stocks performing over the next 10 years. I don't think it'll be in the top 15% of stocks performing in the next 10 or 15 years. I also don't think it'll be in the bottom 10% or 20% or 30%. So, but our ability to have a huge edge over the market generally with a $550 billion market value, it'll be minor, but it'll be done in a very, very safe manner.
Is an investment in the S&P 500 a better investment?
It could be. It could be. On balance, I think we'll do a little better, but it'll be minor. It depends on the kind of market we're in. If we're in a down market, we're going to beat it. I mean, it's that simple. And sometimes we will be. The last 10 years we haven't been. But over 55 years it's worked, and it will continue working, but it will not work at all like it did when we were working with $100 million or $1 billion. There's no question about that. But we've got good businesses, and we won't be in the bottom quartile, I promise you that, over any long period of time.
There are people, like there were back in 1999, who have said, maybe you've lost your edge. It was a similar thing in 1999 where you saw the technology stocks that were the big high flyers, that people were pouring their money into, the dot-com companies and a lot of others associated with that. If you look at the markets again, it's the technology companies that have the big runs. This time you're participating in Apple, which is one of those front runners. But is this a cyclical thing to you? Do you think there'll be another market downturn and then
Oh, there'll be a
Berkshire
downturn
outperforms?
sometime. There'll be a
And
big-
then Berkshire outperforms at that point, or?
Oh, we'll outperform in a down market, but that may not be particularly satisfactory to people. But no, we will, because we have these businesses that are making money, and I mean, we're geared somewhat away from a full market participation in either direction. But that's fine. We own, if you think about it, we're 80-some% in equities. We may show 230 or 40 billion in equities, and that looks like we're against our market cap. We're 40%, but we own 100% of these other businesses. Those are equities too. I mean, we own a railroad, and we own insurance companies, and those are equities. So we're about 80% roughly in equities, and about 20% in cash. And I'd rather have that 20% in other good businesses, but that is to some extent a curse of size, and it's to some extent the fact that it's very hard. If interest rates stay at this level, we'll wish for the next 10 or 20 years, we'll wish we'd been 125% in equities. I mean, equities are so much cheaper than bonds, long bonds, that
So again, this was just said on Twitter.
something will change in a major way. I just don't know what. And I want to be prepared for anything, obviously.
So that's why you keep so much cash around. You want to be able to be prepared for a downturn. You want to be prepared for a crisis.
We want to be prepared for anything, Becky. We want to be prepared for pandemics. We want to be prepared for anything comes along. Yeah. I have people's, and some of them still have 100% of that money, or essentially in it. And the one thing. And I've got the responsibility for 5 foundations that presently are going to get 80 billion, and I think we'll get a lot more over time, probably. We don't want to permanently lose money, and you don't want to get that so that you go into a shell and don't do anything. But we have obligations to people on workers' compensation claims and auto accidents they've had that go out 50 years, and we have to run the place so that every check clears under any circumstances. And that's why, incidentally, we own treasury bills. We don't own commercial paper. We don't rely on bank lines or anything. When people get terrified, and they will occasionally, everything freezes. I mean, and you're going to have to stand on your own feet at a time like that. It won't happen very often, but it'll happen occasionally.
I know you've developed a thick skin over the years, but does it tick you off when people start questioning whether you've lost it, whether you can still?
Well, I'm sure I've lost some of it. I mean, I can tell you all kinds of things I've lost. That happens. But we haven't lost Geico or the railroads. Berkshire, without me, is worth essentially the same as Berkshire with me. I mean, my value added is not high, but I don't think I'm subtracting value. But the big thing is how our businesses do, and what we get to add in the way of businesses over time. And we can add them through marketable securities. I mean, we own 5.5% or a little over of Apple. It's probably the best business I know in the world. And we own 5.5% of it. And that is a bigger commitment that we have in anything except insurance and the railroad. So it's our 3rd largest business.
Yeah, I made the point that it was bigger than your biggest acquisition, Precision
Oh,
Consumer.
sure. No, it's our 3rd largest business.
All right, let me test you on your thick skin.
Okay. Wow.
Here was the kicker of that Barron's cover story. He said, "There's reasons to think that the company will be a market beater when he's gone. In the meantime, happy 90th."
Yeah, well, I hope it is a market beater when I'm gone. I'm counting on it. I'm telling my estate, and then the trustees that succeed my executors in the estate, I'm telling them to keep every share of Berkshire they have until they have this pattern of giving it away. I mean, I want them to look back and say, gee, we should have made this change earlier, because it's going to determine, how much we buy in the way of vaccines and, and all kinds of things, education, and all these things. And I feel terrific about Berkshire after I leave.
I want to talk about another issue that we have not touched on yet, and that's politics here in the United States. We just watched the Nevada caucus. Bernie Sanders walked away with the most delegates after that. He looks to be as the clear front runner for the nomination for the Democrats this time around. You have long been a supporter of the Democratic Party. What do you think?
Well, I think I'm going to wait and see who gets the nomination. But I'm a Democrat, but I'm not a card-carrying Democrat. And I've voted for Republicans. I've contributed to Republicans. In fact, I've only run for 2 offices in my life. One was head of the Young Republicans at the University of Pennsylvania, and the other time I was actually on the ballot running for a delegate to the Republican National Convention in 1960. But normally I vote for Democrats, and we will see what happens.
Wow, that's the first time I've ever heard you say something like that.
Well, I've kept it a secret for all these years, but now it comes out.
You just said that you're not a card-carrying Democrat.
That's true.
You are a card-carrying capitalist. You
Absolutely.
actually have one of those in your wallet.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
I don't know whether I'm a card-carrying capitalist, right? I don't think that's inconsistent with what I've said on politics. Yeah, here it is. I don't know whether that
For
shows.
those who can't see, I'll show you on this camera right here.
Card-carrying capitalist, and
This is what you carry in your wallet.
yeah, and I think we will have some of those available at the annual meeting too for our shareholders.
I think Andrew's got a question that he wanted to jump in with here. Andrew?
With a GM estimated range of 300 plus miles with a full charge and zero compromise, the all-electric Cadillac Lyriq, lighting the way.
I was just going to follow up on that question, Warren, which was about a year ago. We had asked you about Michael Bloomberg, and you had said that if he ever entered the race, he was somebody you would support. Would you support him? Is he your candidate?
Well, I would certainly vote for him. I don't think another billionaire supporting him would be the best thing to announce. But sure, I would have no trouble voting for Mike Bloomberg.
And what do you think his chances are?
Incidentally, well, I don't think I want to get into handicapping the race, but I would say this in terms of Sanders. I actually agree with him in terms of certain things he would like to accomplish. I don't agree with him in many ways, but in terms of the fact that we ought to do better by the people that get left behind by our capitalist system. I don't think we should kill the capitalist system in the process. I think we should make sure that the golden goose keeps laying more eggs, and it's worked wonderfully since 1776. But it doesn't work as well for people whose talents aren't really geared to a market economy. And I don't think anybody should be left behind by an economy that has over $60,000 of GDP per capita. And so I'm a big fan of increasing the earned income tax credit. And I think there should be some changes made. But if given the choice, I would certainly vote for Mike Bloomberg as opposed to Sanders.
There is a plan. Let's talk about some of Sanders' plans. You said you agree with some of what his intentions are, but let's talk about some of those actual plans. One of those plans would be to give 20% of company stock to employees and put workers on the board. What do you think about that? That would be for any company, public company, that has more than $100 million in annual revenue or a $100 million balance sheet.
Well, I don't want to get involved in evaluating his whole plan, but I think that would be a particularly bad idea.
Because?
Well, I don't think that. I don't think putting 20% of the capitalists on a labor union is a good idea either. And I think the market system works very, very well in terms of developing more goods and services. I mean, when you flew out here to Omaha, if you'd flown out here and you wouldn't have been able to fly in 1776, you wouldn't have seen anything. Everything you see is the product of a system that's worked like nothing's ever worked in the history of the world. So I do not believe in messing up our system of developing output. I do believe that anybody who's willing to work 40 hours a week and has a couple of kids should not have to have a second job. And I believe in having a higher income per people, not necessarily a higher minimum wage, but I do not think it's at all unreasonable that the income tax credit produces at least $15 an hour, maybe higher in certain areas. So I'm very much in sympathy with the fact that Senator Sanders believes that a lot of people are getting left behind and through no fault of their own. And there's all kinds of aspects of capitalism that can need in some ways to be regulated, but I don't believe in giving up the capitalistic system.
All right, let me slip in some questions that viewers have written in on this front. Michael Blank writes in, please ask Warren if he thinks the market will sell off if it becomes clear that Bernie Sanders will win the Democratic nomination.
I think I normally would never make a comment on something like that, but I would say that if you had Sanders and a Democratic House and Senate, or if you had Trump with a Republican House and Senate, there would be a significant difference. But I don't think I would necessarily vote on what, in fact, I know I wouldn't vote on what I thought necessarily would affect the market the better. I think it's a very poor yardstick. I would not want to cast my vote in a presidential election based on which would be better for the market in the next 30 or 60 or 90 days after the election.
But your reservations with Bernie Sanders, I assume, come with your concerns about what it means for the economy, not over 30, 60, 90 days, over a much broader period of time.
Certain aspects of the economy, certain things, I'd like to see done. I would like to see the earned income tax credit change dramatically upward.
Alan Bucky writes in a letter. He says, if Michael Bloomberg becomes the Democratic candidate, would you consider buying his company?
No. I can give you a categorical answer to that.
Because of the price, because of the...
There'd be somebody to pay more.
Warren, we've talked this morning about the coronavirus, but there are people who are waking up across the country now, kind of tuning in at this hour. So maybe we should address this again. With the markets indicated down 750 points, with concerns about coronavirus spreading and now worries about what that will mean for the global economy this year. I know this is not something you look at a day-by-day basis, but how do you kind of wake up and read this and think through it?
I don't think it makes no difference in our investments. I mean, there's always going to be some news, good or bad, every day. In fact, if you go back and read all the papers for the last 50 years, probably most of the headlines tend to be bad. But if you look at what happens to the economy, most of the things are extremely good. I mean, it's incredible what will happen over time. So if somebody came and told me that the global growth rate was going to be down 1% instead of 0.1%, I'd still buy stocks if I like the business and I like the price at which and I like the prices better today than I liked them last Friday.
Do you like prices better today? Will Berkshire be buying stock today?
Well, we'll certainly be more inclined to buy stock today than on Friday. Yeah. Anything we were buying Friday, we will be buying today, and feeling better about buying it.
You know, one of the things you talked about in the annual letter was stock buybacks of Berkshire Hathaway.
Right.
And for the first time, you told people to call Mark Millard in your office outright if they have $20 million worth of Berkshire shares and they're ready to sell.
Right.
That's a really unusual move. Why did you do that?
Well, we did it because it's very hard to buy blocks in the market of Berkshire. We practically never see blocks, except we do see them from estates or occasionally. But if somebody's going to sell $100 million worth of Berkshire, and we want to buy it, we'd like them to call us, and if we're buying at that price level, we'll buy it.
Dan Mahoney actually wrote in with a very similar question. He just said, is it hard to buy back the shares?
It's hard to buy. It's harder to buy back Berkshire shares than, say, Bank of America is buying back their shares. Bank of America bought back 8 or 9% of their stock last year, and they can really do it without moving the market. I mean, Apple's been buying back a ton of stock. They were buying stock at the same time we were buying stock. But it was easier for us to buy Apple stock, even though Apple itself was buying a lot of stock, than it is to buy Berkshire. Berkshire is... well, it's held by people that really plan to keep it. I think the amount of speculation in Berkshire stock is relatively low compared to most stocks, and so it's well, we bought $5 billion worth last year, but that's only 1% of the market cap, and I would say with a great many companies you can buy 4 or 5% of the company fairly easily a year without disturbing the market. American Express has been buying it every year.
So with you putting out an ad in the letter to shareholders, does that basically mean you are eager to buy more shares back?
Depends on the price, but we'll let anybody know if told them to call us before the opening or after the close, but and only with blocks and only if they're ready to do business. Now there'll be a few people that probably try and call just to see whether we're buying or not. And we will not show a lot of patience with those people.
Let's talk about shares of Apple. Both from you just mentioning it with the share buybacks, with it being such a huge holding of yours. You've got more than 5.3% of the company right now?
I think it's 5.6, but
5.6%.
and it goes up every day.
Let's talk about what we've seen with the slowdown with the coronavirus, because Apple is one of the companies that has said it's going to have an impact, not only with the stores that they've closed there, with the behavior of Chinese customers, but also what happens with the supply chain.
Supply chain, sure.
How do you read through any of that? What are you hearing? Do you know more than we do on that front?
No, I don't know one thing more. I may see Tim Cook at the annual meeting. I see him in Sun Valley once a year. No, I don't think I've placed a phone call to Tim Cook in 2 or 3 years. All kinds of things are going to happen to Apple over the next 10 years. The real question is what is the degree of pervasiveness and strength of that product 5 or 10 years from now? And I don't think of Apple as a stock. I think it's our third largest business.
It's also a high-flying technology company. It's one that's been at the forefront, but you've said in the past you didn't buy it because it's a technology company.
I think it's a consumer product. In fact, I think I said this on the program a couple of years ago. I mean, obviously it's a consumer product company that uses technology, but we've got a lot of products that use technology at Berkshire. But it's an incredible company, and I should have appreciated it earlier.
There's a question that came in from, I guess the handle is GPG. This is a question that came in on Twitter, and the writer asks, you've said that you can do fair value estimates of companies you follow at any time in your head. So please do one now for Apple. What went wrong with your estimate for IBM, and how is that miscalculation different than for Apple?
IBM's an entirely different business than Apple. I mean, Apple doesn't resemble IBM anymore. It resembles See's Candy in a way more. I mean, it is a incredibly useful product to people that grows more useful as the number of people are involved. I mean, it's really interesting. We call them smartphones. If you go back and look at the old telephone, that was an incredible useful product. It changed my mother's life and my dad's life. It changed lives in every way, and they took a long time to become pervasive, and it was very expensive initially, but it changed the world. And the smartphone is part of hundreds and hundreds of millions of people's lives in all aspects of their lives. It's used as all kinds of utility. It's a consumer product.
Are you a consumer of its products at this point? You've had a flip phone for forever.
I'm glad you brought that up. I am now using, not very often, I'm using the latest model, and I'll give you a little preview of our movie for the annual meeting. We haven't done it yet, but we'll probably showing me crushing with my foot my old flip phone while cozying up to the new smartphone.
When did you get the smartphone?
I've been given several of them, but including by Tim Cook.
One finally stuck?
What, pardon me?
One finally stuck?
Yeah, absolutely. No, my flip phone is permanently gone. The number's been changed to my new phone.
Wow,
yeah.
That's impressive.
I mean, you're looking at an 89-year-old guy that's barely beginning to be with it.
What do you like best about the phone? And what do you like least?
Well, I don't use all its facilities like most people. I mean, most people are living their lives around it, and I use it as a phone.
As a phone and nothing
else. I use it as a phone.
I don't like when investment bankers talk about EBITDA, which I translate as earnings.
That was Berkshire Hathaway Vice Chairman Charlie Munger about a week and a half ago when he was speaking at the annual shareholders meeting for his other company, the Daily Journal, answering questions, giving his usual straight answers when things come up as questions. Warren, that was Charlie talking about EBITDA earnings, calling them BS earnings, although he said it a little more explicitly. You, in your shareholder letter for Berkshire Hathaway, also wrote about how you don't believe in GAAP earnings. How do you guys come about this? What do you think? You still have to report these numbers, but you're basically telling shareholders don't listen to them.
Well, it's two different principles. I mean, the GAAP numbers, which show us earning $80 billion, which is more than any company's ever earned in history, and we explain why that really isn't the relevant statistic, because a lot of that was just the stock market going up, which now gets counted in our earnings. And Charlie was expressing an opinion we both have. Charlie's the shy, reticent one of the pair, but Charlie is the best partner anybody could possibly have. We've been partners now for 60 years, and you could not have a better partner. He, at 96, a woman, since that meeting, actually, in the last couple of weeks, a woman said to him, "Is it true, Mr. Munger, that you have 8 children?" And Charlie's reply was, "So far." So Charlie is very much an active partner, we'll put it that way. Next time I see him, I'll get an update on that to see what so far still going.
Okay, let us know what happens with
Yeah, I will.
We watch pretty closely Charlie's shareholder meeting for the Daily Journal.
Sure.
We send cameras out, we watch it. I've been out myself. Do you watch that meeting too to see what he has to say?
I watched it all on YouTube afterwards, but my sister and one of my good friends and my niece were all there, and no, I end up watching it, and I actually end up reading it usually too. I wouldn't miss it, but I don't go out for it.
Was there anything he said that surprised you this time around? And I'm just looking through some of his.
Actually, nothing Charlie says can surprise me.
Was there anything that enlightened you or changed your opinion on something? Maybe something.
No, but I learn from Charlie every time I talk to him. Charlie has the best 30-second mind in the world, so I can go to him with a new question, new problem of any kind, and it goes through about 8 filters in his mind in 10 seconds, and he gets to the essence of any problem. There is nobody better to talk to than Charlie at age 96.
Is there anything you've talked to him about recently that you might be able to share? I don't know if you want to share the conversations you guys have privately, but anything where you've bounced something off of him and he...
Well, we talk about a lot of things, and we talk particularly about things we don't know the answer to, and we find the whole scene so interesting, whether it's politically or economically or the world. I mean, it's incredibly interesting to us, and we're particularly interested in each other's view. Although I think I'm more interested in his view than he is in mine, and that would be a correct decision to make for somebody overhearing us.
What's something you guys don't understand right now?
Oh, we do not understand at all what the outcome will be in a world where 13 trillion is being borrowed at less than zero, and even Greece went on short-term. I think Greece, the 10-year bond is 1%, for example, and at the same time, in this country, we're having, under very good business and market conditions, we're having a 4.5% federal deficit, and nobody is concerned in the least. And we're talking about massive new programs and so on. Everybody talks about how they'll pay for them, but they really, the deficit's going to widen. So we don't know what world comes out of something where you start with extremely low interest rates and high rates of growth, and then what you do for stimulus later on. But the whole game, the game always unfolds differently than you expect, and that's what makes it so interesting.
The 10-year, speaking of these low rates, just a little bit ago hit its lowest yield since July of 2016 this morning. I think it was 1.377%. We're back at 1.396%, but 10-year rates below 1.4%.
Yeah.
Would you have anticipated this?
It makes no sense to lend money at 1.4% to the U.S. government when it's government policy to change to have 2% a year inflation. I mean, you've got the government is telling you we're going to give you 1.4% and tax you on it, and on the other hand, we're going to presumably devalue that money at 2% a year. So these are very unusual conditions, and classical economics, it doesn't appear that, what do people do under such circumstances? Does everybody buy a mattress and stick their money under the mattress or what? And it particularly seems unusual when the world is generally prosperous, but the game is always changing, but it always looks logical in retrospect, and it always looks puzzling prospectively. But there's always things to do that make sense too.
Like what?
Well, I hope that's what we're doing. It's buying good businesses at decent prices, whether all of the businesses or parts of the businesses through the stock market.
You told me a year and a half ago, maybe longer, that when you went out to try and buy whole businesses right now, it just looks too expensive, which is why you started buying pieces of companies, more stocks, putting money in places like Apple. Is that still the case? Is it still a huge premium to try and buy a company outright?
There's quite a premium, and part of the premium is because you can borrow so much money so cheaply in buying those businesses. Obviously, you can pay more for a business if you can borrow a very high percentage of the purchase price and of the future cash flow committed to it, and you can borrow at low rates with very little in the way of restrictions, restrictive covenants or anything of the sort. I mean, that's going to bring higher prices, and the demand for that is huge, and people look at those rates on the 30-year or the 10-year, and they say to themselves, gee, I can't live on that, and so they stretch and buy poorer credits. But that's just part of the human cycle over time, and that leads to something else, and that leads to something else. In the end, if you own good businesses at the right price, you're going to do fine.
You're often quoted as saying that you don't know who's skinny dipping until the tide goes out, who's swimming naked until the tide goes out,
exactly.
or maybe. You get the sense with a high tide right now that there's a lot of skinny dipping taking place?
We're certainly we're allowing people to borrow money on much weaker terms than we were 5 or 10 years ago. You couldn't borrow money at all there for a period of 10 years ago. I mean, Berkshire couldn't borrow money. I mean, everything stopped. And now the pendulum has swung dramatically, and yet we still have, we have very, very, very low rates. It's hard to believe that 10 years or 20 years from now we will have a substantial continuation of negative interest rates. But I've already seen things I didn't think could happen, so who knows what could happen. That's what makes it interesting.
Let's get back out to Omaha, where Becky Quick is with Warren Buffett, and there's a lot of important things happening, but don't forget that March Madness is right around the corner, Becky.
You should see what he's doing right now, Joe. He was rubbing his hands as you said that. Now you're talking his language.
Now, Creighton, it was 70-35 at one point, and I had Creighton yesterday. I don't know if you were paying attention to that. Were you watching that at all, Warren? Nebraska plays tonight.
We pay attention. We pay attention to Creighton out here.
They're good.
We talked about it earlier this morning off
They're
camera.
peaking. I think they're peaking. I mean, they're getting better and better and better. The three-point shooting was, I think that one guy was 7 for 7 at one point yesterday, which is, I'd be like 7 for 10,000 for three-pointers, I think. Anyway, get back to business. I'm looking forward to it, Warren, and I know we always have our own personal bet. If I get them all right, you give me Berkshire Hathaway, which would be cool for me.
I'll tell you, if you get it all the way, I'll give you my Berkshire Hathaway shares all the way to the 64.
Wow.
Fill out a bracket. That's
Giving
perfect.
pledge. I guess that's the ultimate giving pledge.
Yeah.
That's how sure he is that you won't be able to do it.
I'm pretty sure.
Andrew, I hear you have a question too, Andrew.
I actually have a couple, and I thought that I read the letter like everybody else over the weekend and was fascinated by so many of your comments, Warren. Specifically, I wanted to ask you talk about diversity on boards in this letter. And one of the things I wanted you to weigh in on, if you could, is I don't know if you saw, but David Solomon, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, on our air actually announced a couple of weeks ago that he won't be taking any companies public, Goldman won't, unless they have at least one diverse board member, and are likely going to push that to 2. In the state of California, they put a law into place saying that you needed to have a female board member. And I'm curious what you think of not just the push towards more diversity on boards, but the requirement because I also note in your letter that you have very specific thoughts about what it means to be a board member, what it means to be an independent board member, how wealth is involved in all of that. What are your thoughts?
Well, at Berkshire for decades, we've given the 3 factors in addition to integrity, but for board membership, and we want people who are business savvy. We want them to have a strong personal interest in Berkshire itself, and we've got directors who really represent shareholders basically at Berkshire, and I think they do a great job. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't think that we should delight our customers, that we should treat associates well, that we should behave well in our community, both local and national. But our directors represent the shareholders.
So Warren, just to follow up on it though, what's your thought about both the requirement that maybe banks and others, investors, are going to force companies to have diverse candidates on their board, laws, as I mentioned, in California?
Yeah, actually there's been sent to us a proposal which, unless it's withdrawn, will be on our proxy. I can't tell you precisely what it says, but that relates to this issue, and we will get our shareholders' view on it. I personally, and I want shareholders I want directors that represent the shareholders, and in terms of my estate, with maybe currently $80 billion worth of shares to give to philanthropy, I hope that we have we do have a group of directors that I think will be very conscious of doing the right thing.
The reason I asked the question is because the other point you made, which I think is a very smart one and is often misconstrued in the corporate governance land, is that an independent director these days isn't always independent in large part, and you make the point that those that don't come to the table with some form of wealth often need the job. They need the money, they want the money, and therefore that makes them less independent. And the reason I ask this is one of the things, as we've been trying to get more diverse candidates on boards, more women on boards, as you know, there are fewer CEOs, fewer people who have made enormous amounts of money, and people therefore then can question their independence. It becomes a very tricky issue, and that's what I was hoping you might weigh in on.
Yeah, Andrew, I've been on 21 publicly owned boards of publicly owned companies, and I've seen them in operation, and I would say that people that I have often seen, and it's perfectly understandable, I have often seen people who are classified as independent directors, and they are getting $300,000 a year for a job that takes them a couple of days, maybe 6 times a year, maybe 4 times a year, and the company flies them to their office, and it's very enjoyable, and the company's good, and who wouldn't want a job like that? I mean, it's an incredible job, and I get calls from headhunters, I get calls from CEOs, and they ask, who I think would make a quote good end quote director, and what they are asking is, who is not going to cause too much trouble, and who their name is going to reflect credit on the institution, and they are not looking for somebody that I would regard as really independent, and I don't blame them. I mean, if I had spent my life being a teacher or whatever it might be, I mean, my IQ is just as high as the average or higher than the people on the boards and all that. But on the other hand, I want to get on a board. I mean, $300,000 a year would look terrific, and you don't even have to retire probably in most cases at 65 or anything of the sort. So to call them independent is ridiculous. And if you're on one board like that, you want to really go on another one and make $600,000 a year, and you are not going to do things that irritate your present CEO. So when he or she gets a call and says, "Would this guy make a good director?" that the answer is no. It's just ridiculous to ignore the factor of compensation with board members.
Okay.
All right, let me ask a follow-up question that is similarly related, Warren, and that's just having to do with sustainability, all these issues that are out there. Guys in the control room, sorry, this is not where I told you I was going, but Abhishek Boudra wrote in a question. He said, Larry Fink recently said that our investment conviction is that sustainability and climate-integrated portfolios can provide better risk-adjusted returns to investors. What's your view on sustainable investing?
Well, I don't happen to make that decision when I'm buying stocks in our portfolio. What their individual policies are, I think they're all pro-social. I mean, obviously, you've got to be in tune with your society. But if you think that I look down at a bunch of stocks and decide whether to buy Apple or whether to buy J.P. Morgan or I'm not using the factors and that he lays out.
Okay. I want to run through a series of questions that have been in. These are kind of all over the map, so forgive me, we'll bounce around, but these are questions that came in from viewers that I thought were good ones. Lucas writes in, he said, did Justin Sun change your mind on cryptocurrencies? For anybody who doesn't know, Justin Sun bought the dinner or the lunch that you just had from the last Glide Foundation fundraiser. He is actively involved in Bitcoin. After that meeting, his PR people put out some notes saying that, you kind of listen to cryptocurrency and maybe you're a little more in tune with the idea of Bitcoin now.
Well, I would say this, when Justin and 4 friends came, they behaved perfectly and we had a good 3.5-hour dinner and the whole thing was a very friendly exchange of ideas. But cryptocurrencies basically have no value and they don't produce anything. So you can look at your little ledger item for the next 20 years and it says you've got X of this cryptocurrency or that. It doesn't reproduce, it doesn't deliver, it can't mail you a check, it can't do anything. And what you hope is that somebody else comes along and pays you more money for it later on. But then that person's got the problem. But in terms of value, zero.
So it sounds like he did not change your position.
No, but I didn't change his either. And I had a very pleasant dinner, and those people they behaved more than well. And they gave Justin gave $4.6 million to Glide, and that will buy a lot of meals and provide a lot of beds for people in San Francisco. So I thank him.
He gave you some Bitcoin. What's it feel like to be a Bitcoiner?
I don't have any Bitcoin.
You don't?
No.
Okay.
No.
You don't own Bitcoin?
No, I do not own one. I don't own any cryptocurrency. I never will. And in the end, I may start a Warren currency. Maybe I can create one and I'll say there's only going to be 21 million of them and you can have a little ledger sheet from me and everything that says you have it. And you can have it after I die, but you can't do anything with it except sell it to somebody else. And the interesting thing, of course, is that Bitcoin's been out there a long time and people talked about how it would be used in various kinds of exchange, but none of our companies are doing business in Bitcoin or anything. Bitcoin has been used, I think, to move around a fair amount of money illegally. So the people
maybe in countries where you have
so the logical move from the introduction of Bitcoin is to go short suitcases, because the money that was taken in suitcases from one country to another, suitcases will probably fall off in demand. I mean, so you can look at that as the economic contribution of Bitcoin to the society.
All right, let's talk about a question that comes in from Rusty Thomas, and he's got a question on baseball. He said, given Warren's love of baseball and the contrast between his deft management of the Solomon Brothers scandal and Major League Baseball's inexplicable mismanagement of the Astros sign-stealing debacle, what advice would Warren provide MLB Commissioner Manfred to restore confidence and integrity in the game?
Yeah, well, it survived the Black Sox scandal back around 1920, and people will continue to love baseball, but it was one thing to steal signs if you were on second base, but it's bad. Baseball will get past this.
You're a huge baseball fan. Were you?
Pardon me?
You're a huge baseball fan. Were you surprised to hear about?
Yeah, I was surprised to hear about it. Yeah, but then I found out that Bobby Thompson's home. Somebody stolen the sign. I think off Ralph Reich or somebody. So people are gonna, in any games, including the stock market game, a certain number of people cheat. and generally we have people that administer things to try and minimize the cheating, and I'm sure that Major League Baseball will address the problem.
Should the Astros players get off scot-free?
I'm not going to make a judgment on that, but Joe Jackson certainly didn't. Yeah.
Let me ask you about a question that came in from several viewers, actually, and that's about ETFs. DeMosley Management wrote this version of the question, and news agencies have reported that Berkshire Hathaway purchased 2 ETFs. So can you talk about if this purchase happened, and if the purchase happened, who purchased the ETF for Berkshire Hathaway, and how was the decision made to purchase it?
Yeah, it wasn't me. It wasn't me, or it wasn't Todd, or it wasn't Ted, and it happened in some pension fund, and we have a few pension funds that aren't actually managed by us. But all I can tell you is that nobody that manages money at Berkshire is buying ETFs, nor do I see any possibility that they will.
Another purchase that came up recently, Kroger, and Jason Escamilla writes in, was that one of yours or a lieutenant's pick?
It was one of the others, I know Kroger. Kroger's done a good job, but it's in a very tough business. I mean, when you have Amazon and Walmart slugging it out and Costco taking a special part of it and everything, it's a tough business, but they've done a good job, and one of our managers decided to buy that.
And then Kraft Heinz. This comes in from David Hall. He says, Mr. Buffett, while Kraft Heinz continues to whittle down their total debt, do you feel that the current dividend payout is appropriate, or should it be reduced further to free up more cash flow to reduce debt more rapidly?
I think Kraft Heinz should pay down its debt, and it should. But I think under present circumstances, it appears that it can pay the dividend and pay down debt at a reasonable rate, and it has too much debt, but it doesn't have debt it can't pay down, and the debt holders are going to get the interest, and the debt should come down year by year, and I think it will, and I think it can with the present dividend, but who knows for sure in the future.
Theo Philos writes in a similar question and says, do you still believe in the company and management at Kraft Heinz?
It's still a great business in the sense that it earns, we'll say, $5 billion after depreciation, pre-tax, on $7 billion of tangible assets. It uses about $7 billion of fixed assets. It has no net working capital. I mean, it's a very valuable business, but we paid too much for Kraft, and we took on more debt in that, but we paid too much.
Another question comes in from Beal, again on Kraft Heinz, and this person writes in, private labels have performed very well against brands like Kraft Heinz, but they haven't made a dent against other brands like Coca-Cola or See's. Why do you think that is, and how do you think about brands' moats, given your experience with Kraft?
Brands are always going to be in a fight with the retailer, and it varies by country enormously. It varies by product category. If people, I worked in a grocery store in 1941. Charlie worked in the same one in 1940. People would call in, they'd ask for a can of peas, and I'd write down a can of peas. They'd call in and they'd ask for Heinz ketchup, and I better give them Heinz ketchup. They didn't care which brand the peas were. They didn't care that much whether the 2 quarts of milk we sent them were this brand or that brand, but they cared whether it was Heinz ketchup. That was 1941. Some brands are terribly strong. You can't bring out a private label cola and do very well with it, and people have tried for a long, long time. On the other hand, you can bring out private labels and lots of products, and they sell very well. And you take Costco with their old Kirkland label. I mean, that label grows dramatically. It cuts across categories. It's done since 1992 or whenever it was introduced. Other people spent 100 years, with huge amounts of advertising and special display, all kinds of things. So the battle goes on. I would say that the retailer has gained ground against brands to some degree, but brands are still terribly important. I mean, try and give me a $10 billion budget and ask me to bring out another Coca-Cola that makes a dent in Coca-Cola, and I can't do it.
Warren, one of the questions that did come in, it was something that you wrote about in the annual letter, was the role that Greg and Ajit play. Greg Abel, Ajit Jain, the two vice chairmen who were recently added as vice chairman, the role that they're going to be playing in the annual meeting with shareholders. You said that they will play a larger role in the shareholder meeting. How will that work?
Well, it will mean that any shareholder or any of the journalists there who are presenting questions from shareholders that have been sent to them can direct those questions to either Ajit or to Greg. So if they were insurance questions, they might want to direct them to Ajit, non-insurance questions to Greg. But they will be there, and we'll have 60 or so questions. We don't know what they're going to be, and if anybody says, I would like Greg to answer this, or I would like Ajit to answer this, then they're right there adjacent to us.
They'll be sitting on stage with you and Charlie?
Well, he's sitting in front of the crowd. There's two different levels of tiers there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Again, you said you did this because you'd gotten a lot of questions from directors, shareholders, other people who had kind of advised you that they thought it was good for them to be playing a bigger role.
Everybody, I heard from quite a few people. Now, we directed questions out to them when they were sitting with the directors out in front, and then the spotlight went down. But this may encourage more questions directly of them, and that'll be terrific.
Okay. Jim Beam writes in a question. He says, in the past, both you and Bill Gates have stated that half of the board meetings are spent discussing succession. How has this changed since Ajit and Greg are on the board? Do they leave the room?
They leave the room. But if I die tonight, the board tomorrow morning knows exactly what they're going to do. Hope they're polite about it, let the body cool off. But basically, they know what they're going to do. And the interesting thing about it is, we own the Apple and JP Morgan, all those things. I don't know who's going to succeed the CEOs of any of the companies I think that we own stock in. But we're well prepared for succession. It's almost going to be embarrassing how well.
All right, let's get to a few more shareholder questions. Chip Crook writes in a note and says, it was reported that Boeing was looking for a large cash loan. Were you ever approached about Berkshire loaning the money, kind of like the Goldman Sachs deal from years ago?
I think Boeing's raised about $13 billion, but that's bank type money. In other words, my memory is it's maybe 1%, plus like they're looking for traditional bank loans, and we don't make traditional bank loans.
You also talked in the letter about how Berkshire Hathaway Energy, has the ability and the talent to manage big investments, $100 billion and more. I think you wrote, we stand ready and willing and able on such opportunities. California Governor Gavin Newsom asked you at one point to bid on PG&E. Is that such an opportunity?
PG&E, we worked with them for decades and been familiar with them, but that doesn't fit Berkshire. But if there were $100 billion of transmission lines or whatever it might be, Berkshire could do it. And we would love it. That happens to be a very tough thing to do because you cross all these states and everybody says not in my backyard and all that. But there can be huge intelligent investment made in the utility energy area, and no one is better equipped to do it than Berkshire in both talent and resources.
Why does PG&E not fit that bill?
It's too tough. I don't know the answer to it. Rearranging that utility, I think I know Governor Newsom. I think he's a very, very, very smart guy, and in terms of solving this problem, it's just not easy. You've got so many constituencies, and they're at each other's throats, and there's lots of money involved, and I don't want to be the guy to try. I don't know how to solve all that.
Okay, let's go on to a question that is posed by Ken Ducey. He says, you sold 31 newspapers after buying them over 40 years as a self-described newspaper addict. You said recently that most newspapers were toast. I know that's not exactly what you said.
Yeah, that's not true.
But this is in his question. You can answer that too. Do you believe the problem with local newspapers is a lack of demand or a lack of innovation and a new business model?
Well, the problem is that, getting back to the toast comment, Andy Sherware actually is the fellow that said toast. He was interviewing me and I repeated it. But the problem is, and even every day, the circulation of the papers and every print circulation goes down. And the interesting thing about it, of course, is that the three survivors so far that look promising online are the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. All three of those papers sold their smaller papers. The New York Times sold, I think, 11 papers about 7 or 8 years ago. The Dow Jones, which owned the Wall Street Journal and now is owned by News Corp, they sold the Ottaway newspapers, 8 papers. Washington Post sold the Everett Herald. So they all saw the handwriting on the wall before I did, and they all sold their papers. That was their reaction. They did not try and figure out the online solutions. They got out of them, and unfortunately, I bought some, and we're still in. I mean, we are financing Lee, and we think Lee has by far the best opportunity to continue print as long as anybody, and to find an online solution for these papers. So we put new money into the newspaper industry here, or we've committed to do it. It'll close in a month or two.
And then finally, very quickly, we are in the Berkshire Hathaway's headquarters building here in Omaha. Strom writes in a question that says, why did you decide to rent your offices for all these years instead of buying the building or building your own office building?
Well, we only use 1 floor of the 15 floors here, but we haven't signed a lease for the next 20 years on 1 more floor, so it shows just how flexible our thinking is about the future.
How much growth you're anticipating?
Yeah, we don't want a big headquarters office. If we had a big headquarters office, we'd fill it, believe me. I mean, if we had 15 floors of our own, we'd have 15 floors worth of people.
Warren, and before we let you go, let's just go back to the futures again this morning, because right now the Dow is indicated to open down about 830 points. Weakness again on concerns about coronavirus and what that means. What's your mentality today as you kind of go out and look at the stock market and decide what you're going to do?
We're buying businesses to own for 20 or 30 years. We buy them in whole, we buy them in part. They're called stocks when we buy them in part. And we think the 20 and 30-year outlook is not changed by coronavirus.
All right. Warren, I want to thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it, your generosity with your time, and we hope to see you again soon.
Come every year.
Thank you.
get it, but I don't want, I don't want to do it. I know that, but I didn't know, but listen, I'm not, no, listen, I'm not doing it right now, I'm not doing it right now. No, I'm just not doing it.
Good morning. The Judiciary Committee will come to order, and without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time. We welcome everyone to this morning's hearing on transparency and accountability, examining Google and its data collection, use, and filtering practices. Before I recognize myself and the ranking member for opening statements, I'd like to recognize our first witness, the Majority Leader, Kevin McCarthy of California, for his statement. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Mr. Goodlatte, Chairman Goodlatte, for working with me to organize this hearing. I want to thank Sundar Pichai for testifying on Capitol Hill. We appreciate and note your willingness to travel here and answer our questions. First, in a private setting in September, and now in a public setting. Google is one of the most valuable companies in America because of what it does. Google's search engine organizes the entire internet, and by extension, almost all the information in the world. This is hardly an exaggeration. Here's a statistic you will hear a lot today, but it bears repeating. According to the Wall Street Journal, 90% of all internet searches go through Google. That is power, and it comes with responsibility. Mr. Pichai, it was necessary to convene this hearing because of the widening gap of distrust between technology companies and the American people. For our country and economy to grow stronger, the American people must be able to have trust in the great companies of the 21st century. We can alleviate some of their concerns today with transparency and candor. I hope we can begin to restore trust in the technology companies that shape our world, but we need answers. We need to know first that Google is committed to the free market ideals of competition and entrepreneurship that launched its revolutionary products to begin with. Second, we need to be sure that any political bias within Google's workforce does not creep into its search products. Third, we need to know that Google is living up to the America's belief in free expression and human rights when it deals with foreign governments. Now, a word on the last subject. Right now, Google reportedly is developing a censored search engine with the Chinese Communist Party. It is also developing next-generation technology on Chinese soil and in conjunction with Chinese national champions like Tencent. Technology that the administration considers a national priority. Now, this news raises a troubling possibility. that Google is being used to strengthen China's system of surveillance, repression, and control. Right this very second, China's authoritarian system detains more than 1 million religious minorities in re-education camps. Mr. Pichai, I urge you to reflect on that fact and on the promise your company made when it pulled out of the China market in 2010. And I applauded you for that move in 2010. Back then, Google promised it would not censor its search results in China or compromise its commitment to a free and open internet. Now, in light of these recent events, I think the American people deserve to know, is something changed? And if so, what? All of these topics, competition, censorship, bias, and others point to one fundamental question that demands the nation's attention. Are America's technology companies serving as instruments of freedom or instruments of control? Are they fulfilling the promise of the digital age? Are they advancing the cause of self-government? Or are they serving as instruments of manipulation, used by powerful interests and foreign governments to rob the people of their power, agency, and dignity? I believe we need to grapple with these questions together as a nation. Because a free world depends on a free internet. We need to know that Google is on the side of the free world, and that it will provide its services free of anti-competitive behavior, political bias, and censorship. I want to thank you again for being here and answering these questions. I look forward to listening to the answers with a very open mind, and I yield back.
I'd now like to invite Mr. Pichai to take his seat at the witness table. Without objection, the chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Nadler, for a point of personal privilege to recognize a member of his staff, a very distinguished member of his staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to take a moment to recognize Danielle Brown, whose last working day for the committee is tomorrow. Danielle has served on the Judiciary Committee Democratic staff for more than a decade in a variety of roles, beginning as staff assistant and then going to counsel, parliamentarian, chief legislative counsel, and most recently, deputy chief counsel. Danielle has been essential to the operations of this committee, and she has been involved in nearly every important piece of committee business over the last decade. Her interests and expertise range from protecting vulnerable immigrants to ensuring reproductive freedom and preserving vital consumer protections. She is leaving us now, unfortunately, to become general counsel and parliamentarian of the Ways and Means Committee. Our loss is surely their gain. I wish her well. I appreciate her wise counsel. I thank her for all of her years of service to this committee, and I hope the committee will join me in thanking her for her years of service to this committee.
Would the gentleman yield?
I will yield to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I would like to join him in thanking Danielle for her service to this committee. She has worked with members on both sides of the aisle. She has worked with the majority staff very productively, very cooperatively on a great many issues that have made this committee not only more productive, but also operating in a fashion that has resulted in a number of bills getting from this committee all the way to the president's desk, whether that president be Barack Obama or Donald Trump. That's an accomplishment that this entire committee should be proud of, and Danielle should be proud that she's played an important part in doing that. And I thank you. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. In the United States, Google operates the preeminent internet search engine, the leading email service provider, and the Android operating system, which runs most of the smartphones in the United States. When a consumer performs an internet search, sends an email, or uses his or her smartphone, Google collects information on that person. In fact, almost every minute of every day, the Android operating system sends information about the exact location, temperature, barometric pressure, and speed of movement of every phone that runs on the Android operating system. With Americans carrying their smartphones all day, every day, Google is able to collect an amount of information about its users that would even make the NSA blush. Of course, when users click through the terms of service for these services, they do consent to such collection. I think it is fair to say that most Americans have no idea the sheer volume of detailed information that is collected. Today, I hope to get answers on the extent of data collection and use by Google. In addition, decades ago, Congress passed the Communications Decency Act, including Section 230 of that act, which allows service providers to remove lewd, lascivious, excessively violent, or otherwise objectionable content from their platforms. This law allows service providers to remove illegal materials, including child pornography and content that is illegal under our intellectual property laws. While meant to allow them to block illegal, obscene, and harmful materials, there is some discretion that service providers, by necessity, must use to make decisions about what content is harmful or objectionable. Given Google's ubiquity in the search market, Google is often consumers' first and last stop when searching for information on the internet. As such, this committee is very interested in how Google makes decisions about what constitutes objectionable content that justifies filtering, and who at Google makes these decisions. Given the revelation that top executives at Google have discussed how the results of the 2016 elections do comply with Google's values, these questions have become all the more important. While it is true that Google is not a government entity, and so it does not have to comply with the First Amendment, the American people deserve to know what types of information they are not getting when they perform searches on the internet. The market works best when information about products and services is readily available. And so today, on behalf of this committee and the American consumer, I hope to get answers from Mr. Pichai regarding who at Google makes the judgment calls on whether to filter or block objectionable content, and what metrics Google uses to make those decisions. I want to thank Google's CEO for his willingness to testify today and to answer these and other questions. With respect to search results, algorithmic screening is the primary means through which Google sorts data and information. Google's search algorithm, for example, calculates what is presented to a user based on the variables the user inputs into the search bar. At its best, Google's algorithm reaches the best answer in the least amount of time while providing choices to the user by ranking pages most relevant to the search inquiry. Of course, by ranking pages, Google search always favors one page over another. This kind of bias appears harmless. After all, the point of a search is to discriminate among multiple relevant sources to find the best answer. This process, however, turns much more sinister with allegations that Google manipulates its algorithm to favor the political party it likes, the ideas that it likes, or the products that it likes. There are numerous allegations in the news that Google employees have thought about doing this, talked about doing this, and have done it. The dangerous implications to a fair democratic process cannot be understated. One study performed by psychologist Robert Epstein has revealed that internet search rankings have a significant impact on consumer choices, mainly because users trust and choose higher ranked results more than lower ranked results. After performing 5 relevant double-blind randomized controlled experiments using a total of 4,556 undecided voters representing diverse demographic characteristics of the voting populations of the United States and India, the study revealed that biased search rankings can shift the voting preferences of undecided voters by 20% or more. The shift can be much higher in some demographic groups, and search ranking bias can be masked so that people show no awareness of the manipulation. The potential for this kind of bias is clearly problematic, and is further compounded by the fact that Google every day collects mountains of information about its users while they are actively engaged with a Google product or even when they are not. According to a study conducted by Vanderbilt University, a dormant, stationary Android phone with Chrome active in the background communicated location information to Google 340 times during a 24-hour period, or at an average of 14 data communications per hour. The collection of location data may be obvious to most users, but they are often unaware of the many sensors that the Android platform supports, including an accelerometer, a barometer, and a photometer. These sensors, in addition to the cameras and microphone on a mobile device, can collate into a very accurate picture of where a user is, what they are doing, and who else is there. The shocking amount of information that Google collects via its phones was recently featured on Good Morning America, in which a reporter using an Android phone with no SIM card that wasn't connected to the internet discovered that the phone collected the device's movement, even identifying the mode of transportation, such as the subway or even a bicycle, and at times taking 10 sensor readings per minute. Moreover, Google's practice of reinforcing its dominance in light of allegations of self-serving bias creates little choice for consumers across the spectrum of internet-based products or services. Given that Google's ads show up on non-Google websites, and Google's search engine is being used as the default search tool on other products, such as the Apple phone, it is almost impossible to avoid Google altogether. Google is many things. It's one of the largest data collectors ever seen in human history. It's an advertiser that can get the right product to the right customer at precisely the right time. Google is also an internet giant, directing over 3.5 billion searches per day. With this massive authority, however, comes the potential for far-reaching abuse. The mere suspicion that Google manipulates its products and features for self-serving or even political purposes raises serious concerns about its business practices, its impact on free speech and our democratic process, and Americans' trust that the information gathered about them in their day-to-day lives is done with their knowledge and is not being used against them. My hope is that through our inquiries today, we will ensure more transparency and accountability going forward. Last, despite the nature and scope of today's hearing, Google is still the story of the American dream. The company was started by two individuals in a garage and grew to be one of the most successful companies in the world. 2 decades ago, we could not fathom instantaneous access to more information than that which is contained in all the encyclopedias in the world. Now we take that for granted because of the innovative services Google provides. With that, I want to again thank our witness for his presence here today. I look forward to your testimony. It's now my pleasure to recognize the ranking member of the committee, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, our society has become increasingly reliant on social media and other online platforms to obtain, create, share, and sort information. This information helps us make decisions ranging in importance from where to make dinner reservations to which candidate to vote for in a presidential election. The public's increasing use of these platforms has generated many positive benefits for society, but it has also given rise to some troubling trends. Google is among the dominant firms in this field. As such, given the public's widespread use and reliance on its products and services, there are legitimate questions regarding the company's policies and practices, including with respect to content moderation and the protection of user privacy. But before we delve into these questions, I must first dispense with a completely illegitimate issue, which is the fantasy, dreamed up by some conservatives, that Google and other online platforms have an anti-conservative bias. As I've said repeatedly, no credible evidence supports this right-wing conspiracy theory. I have little doubt that my Republican colleagues will spend much of their time presenting a laundry list of anecdotes and out-of-context statements made by Google employees as supposed evidence of anti-conservative bias. But none of that will actually make it true. But this fact-free propaganda does help generate the mistrust that the majority leader referred to a few moments ago. And even if Google were deliberately discriminating against conservative viewpoints, just as Fox News and Sinclair Broadcasting and conservative talk radio hosts like Rush Limbaugh discriminate against liberal points of view, that would be its right as a private company to do so, not to be questioned by government. During the Reagan administration, about 35 years ago, the Federal Communications Commissioners appointed by Ronald Reagan abolished what we used to have called the Fairness Doctrine, which placed an obligation on broadcasters who use the public airwaves to be fair to different points of view. This question might be relevant if the Republican members wanted to bring back the Fairness Doctrine and expand its scope to social media companies. I doubt we will see any interest in doing so. But we should not let the delusions of the far right distract us from the real issues that should be the focus of today's hearing. For example, we should examine what Google is doing to stop hostile foreign powers from using its platform to spread false information in order to harm our political discourse. It has been more than 2 years since the 2016 election, yet this committee has not held a single hearing focused on Russia's campaign to manipulate online platforms to undermine American democracy, despite the fact that it is the consensus view of our intelligence agencies that Russia engaged in a massive disinformation campaign to influence the 2016 election. I hope that Mr. Pichai can tell us what actions Google has taken to counter this unprecedented attack and what gaps remain in its defenses without being so specific as to give a guidance to foreign powers. This may help Congress determine what more democratic processes from foreign interference. We should also examine how Google enforces community standards that prohibit racist or bigoted threats and other inappropriate conduct. While internet platforms have produced many societal benefits, they have also provided a new tool for those seeking to stoke racial and ethnic hatred. The presence of hateful conduct and content on these platforms has been made all the more alarming by the recent rise in hate-motivated violence. According to statistics recently released by the FBI, reported incidents of hate crimes rose by 17% last year compared to 2016, marking the third consecutive year that such reports have increased. The horrible massacre at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, the recent murder of an African-American couple in a Kentucky grocery store, the killing of an Indian engineer last year in Kansas are sadly not isolated outbursts of violence, but the most salient examples of a troubling trend. We should consider to what extent Google and other online platforms may have been used to foment and to disseminate such hatred, and how these platforms can play a constructive role in combating its spread. As the dominant player in its field, Google possesses significant market power. It is also useful to examine its policies and practices to ensure that other companies are able to compete in an open and fair marketplace. There are also concerns about the prevalence of pirated material available on Google and other internet platforms at the expense of legitimate content. Finally, it is important to know what Google is doing to protect its users' data privacy and data security. The Wall Street Journal recently reported that Google discovered last March that a bug in its social media platform Google Plus had exposed the private profile data of up to 500,000 users to third-party developers, but it opted not to disclose the issue publicly, not even to those who may have been affected at the time. And just yesterday, the company announced that it had discovered another Google Plus bug that may have exposed the private profile data of millions of users. While Google has so far found no evidence that developers have in fact abused these bugs, or that any user profile data has been misused in any way, incidents like this still raise legitimate questions about what types of data exposures a company is obligated to disclose publicly. It also raises questions about how much control users should have over their own data and how such control should be regulated. I am also disturbed by recent reports that Google is developing a search engine for the Chinese mainland market. According to these reports, this search engine would not only accommodate Chinese government censors, it might allow the Chinese government to track individuals by linking search terms to the user's mobile phone number. Unfortunately, in this, our fourth hearing devoted to entirely fictitious allegations of anti-conservative bias by internet companies, we will waste more time and more taxpayer money on elevating well-worn right-wing conspiracy theories instead of concentrating on the substantive questions and issues that should be the focus of our hearings. Our committee can and must and will do better. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Nadler. We welcome our distinguished witness, and if you would please rise, I'll begin by swearing you in. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony that you are about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record show that the witness answered in the affirmative. Our only witness today is Mr. Sundar Pichai. Mr. Pichai is the Chief Executive Officer of Google. Your written statement will be entered into the record in its entirety, and we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. To help you stay within that time, there's a timing light on your table. When the light switches from green to yellow, you have 1 minute to conclude your testimony. When the light turns red, it signals your 5 minutes have expired. Mr. Pichai, you are very welcome, and you may begin.
Chairman Goodlatte, Ranking Member Nadler, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I joined Google 15 years ago and have been privileged to serve as CEO for the past 3 years. But my love for information and technology began long before that. It's been 25 years since I made the US my home. Growing up in India, I have distinct memories of when my family got its first phone and its first television. Each new technology made a profound difference in our lives. Getting the phone meant I could call ahead to the hospital to check that the blood results were in instead of taking a 2-hour trip there. And the television, well, it only had one channel, but I couldn't have been more thrilled by its arrival. Those experiences made me a technology optimist, and I remain one today. Not only because I believe in technology, but because I believe in people and their ability to use technology to improve their lives. I'm incredibly proud of what Google does to empower people around the world, especially here in the US. I'd like to take a moment to share a bit of background on that. 20 years ago, 2 students, one from Michigan and one from Maryland, came together at Stanford with a big idea: to provide users with access to the world's information. That mission still drives everything we do, whether that's saving you a few minutes on your morning commute or helping doctors detect disease and save lives. Today, Google is more than a search engine. We are a global company that's committed to building products for everyone. That means working with many industries, from education and healthcare to manufacturing and entertainment. Even as we expand into new markets, we never forget our American roots. It's no coincidence that a company dedicated to free flow of information was founded right here in the US. As an American company, we cherish the values and freedoms that have allowed us to grow and serve so many users. And I'm proud to say we do, and we will continue to work with the government to keep our country safe and secure. Over the years, our footprint has expanded far beyond California to states such as Texas, Virginia, Oklahoma, and Alabama. Today in the US, we are growing faster outside of the Bay Area than within it. I've had the great opportunity to travel across the country and see all the places that are powering our digital economy, from Clarksville to Pittsburgh to San Diego, where we recently launched a partnership with the USO to help veterans and military families. Along the way, I've met many people who depend on Google to learn new skills, find jobs, or new businesses. Over the past year, we have supported more than 1.5 million American businesses. And over the past 3 years, we have made direct contributions of $150 billion to the US economy, added more than 24,000 employees, and paid over $43 billion to our US partners across Search, YouTube, and Android. These investments strengthen our communities and support thousands of American jobs. They also allow us to provide great services to our users to help them through the day. It's an honor to play this role in people's lives. And it's one we know comes with great responsibility. Protecting the privacy and security of our users has long been an essential part of our mission. We've invested an enormous amount of work over the years to bring choice, transparency, and control to our users. These values are built into every product we make. We recognize the important role of governments, including this committee, in setting rules for the development and use of technology. To that end, we support federal privacy legislation and proposed a legislative framework for privacy earlier this year. Users look to us to provide accurate, trusted information. and we work hard to ensure the integrity of our products. We have put a number of checks and balances in place to ensure they continue to live up to our standards. I lead this company without political bias and work to ensure that our products continue to operate that way. To do otherwise would be against our core principles and our business interests. We are a company that provides platforms for diverse perspectives and opinions, and there is no shortage of them amongst our employees. Some Googlers are former servicemen and women who have risked much in defense of their country. Some are civil libertarians who fiercely defend freedom of expression. Some are parents who worry about the role technology plays in our households. Some, like me, are immigrants who are profoundly grateful to the freedoms and opportunities it offers. And some of us are many of these things. Let me close by saying that leading Google has been the greatest professional honor of my life. It's a challenging moment for our industry, but I'm privileged to be here. I greatly appreciate you letting me share the story of Google and our work to build products worthy of the trust users place in us. Thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. We'll now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions, and I'll begin by recognizing myself. Mr. Pichai, is it true that the Android operating system sends Google information every few minutes, detailing the exact location of a smartphone within a few feet, the speed of movement of the phone, the altitude of the phone sufficient to determine what floor of a building the phone is on, the temperature surrounding the phone, and other readings? And if so, with Americans carrying their phones with them virtually at all times, doesn't the collection of this volume of detailed information really mean that Google is compiling information about virtually every movement an individual with a smartphone is making every hour of every day?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. Today, for any service we provide our users, we go to great lengths to protect their privacy, and we give them transparency, choice, and control. Android is a powerful platform and provides smartphone for over 2 billion people. And as part of that, it depends on the applications users choose to use. If you're using a fitness application, which is detecting the number of steps you walk, you expect it to send that information. But it's a choice users make. We make it clear, and it depends on the use cases.
So the answer to my question, my first question, is yes. Is that correct? That the information that I cited is gathered by Google? For Google services, you have a choice of what information is collected, and we make it transparent. I understand there are uses that consumers make use of. I use it to keep track of the number of steps I walk. I understand that service that one of your competitors provides, so I understand that purpose. But do you think the average consumer understands that Google will collect this volume of detailed information when they click through the terms of service agreements in order to use the Android operating system?
It's really important for us that that average users are able to understand it. This is why we do something called privacy checkup.
I think average users read the terms of service and the updates that are very frequently sent to us?
Beyond the terms of service, we remind users to do a privacy checkup, and we make it very obvious. Every month, in fact, in the last 28 days, 160 million users went to their My Account settings, where they can clearly see what information we have. We actually show it back to them, and we give clear toggles by category where they can decide whether that information is collected, stored, or more importantly, if they decide to stop using it, we work hard to make it possible for users to take their data with them if they choose to use another service.
Let me switch to the issue of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. You heard me say in my opening statement that this provides broad liability protections for you and other technology companies for good faith restrictions that when Google thinks something is obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable. On the other hand, objectionable material, by whatever standard applied, likely elicits the most engagement from users on your site. And for Google, increased engagement potentially means increased revenue. However, it is important for Google to make very clear where it draws the line and I don't believe Google has done its best to make that clear. So what I would ask is the following. Would Google or YouTube be willing to make changes in support of a healthier civic dialogue if doing so meant a drop in user engagement metrics?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. We have a long track record of, we have always focused on long-term goals towards user satisfaction. We focus on their knowledge, happiness, success, and that's what we work hard to create. It is important to us that platforms like YouTube are viable over the long run. It's in our natural incentive to do so. YouTube is a place where users, advertisers, and content creators who make their livelihoods use the platform. And so we want to make this work in a sustainable way.
When it comes to political advertising, as you know, some of your competitors in other advertising media are required by law to offer the same rate, the lowest rate, as a matter of fact, to all political candidates. So, for example, that's true in television and radio. Would Google, should competing political candidates be charged the same effective ad rates to reach prospective voters?
Our advertising products are built without any bias, and the rates are competitive, set by a live auction process. So depending on the keywords for which you're bidding for, depending on the demand there is in the auction, the prices are automatically calculated. So, the system decides that based on supply and
I understand it's
demand.
automatically calculated, but could two competing political candidates targeting the same audience see different ad rates? And if yes, could that disparity be substantial?
There wouldn't be a difference based on any political reasons unless there are keywords which are of particular interest and the market determines it. So it's essentially a supply-demand equilibrium. It can lead to difference in rates, but it will vary from time to time.
Can those rates be very substantial in difference?
There could be occasions where, yes, there could be difference in rates. Yeah, I haven't looked at the specifics of it yet.
So the result is different than in other markets like television or radio, where every candidate is entitled to the lowest rate that television station or radio station offers to any political candidate for office.
There could be variations based on the time of the day, the keywords you're choosing to go for, the geographies you're advertising in. But it's decided by the system, and it's a process we have done for over 20 years. And let me assure you, anything to do with our civic process, we make sure we do so in a nonpartisan way, and it's really important for us.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Pichai. According to media reports, Google found evidence that, let me go the other one first. Google found a bug in its Google Plus social media platform that could have potentially exposed the private data of up to 500,000 users without the consent of third-party developers. Google, however, did not disclose this bug until months later after it was revealed by a report in the Wall Street Journal. Yesterday, as I mentioned before, you announced another bug. What legal obligations is the company under to disclose data exposures that do not involve sensitive financial information, but still involve private personal data like a user's name, age, email address, or phone number?
Congressman, we take privacy seriously. The bugs you mentioned are bugs. We found them by either doing an audit or using our automated testing systems. Whenever we find any bugs, we follow. It gets escalated to our Privacy and Data Protection Office, and we comply with.
All right, I'm not criticizing what you do. I'm asking what legal obligation is the company under to disclose such data exposures that don't involve financial information but still involve other personal information?
It depends on the situation. We follow the requirements, and in that case, in the first case, typically we look at our legal requirements, but we go above and beyond to make sure we do the right thing for our users. In the first case, there was no evidence data was misused, and we couldn't accurately.
I understand all that, but my question is, what legal obligations are there?
Today, right now, if you've found a bug, and you've ascertained, once you've done the investigation and you've ascertained the users who are eligible for notification, my understanding is you have 72 hours, and we both notify users as well as regulators in that time frame.
Okay, thank you. Now, according to media reports, Google found evidence that Russian agents spent thousands of dollars to purchase ads on its advertising platforms that span multiple Google products as part of the Russian agents' campaign to interfere in the election 2 years ago. Additionally, Juniper Downs, head of global policy for YouTube, testified in July that YouTube had identified and shut down multiple channels containing thousands of videos associated with the Russian misinformation campaign. Does Google now know the full extent to which its online platforms were exploited by Russian actors in the election 2 years ago?
We have, we undertook a very thorough investigation, and in 2016, we now know that there were two main ad accounts linked to Russia, which advertised on Google for about $4,700 in advertising. We also found other limited
total of $4,700.
That's right. Which was no amount is okay here, but we found limited activity, improper activity. We have learned a lot from that, and we've dramatically increased the protections we have around our election offerings. Leading up to the current elections, we again found limited activity, both from the Internet Research Agency in Russia, as well as accounts linked to Iran.
And what specific steps have you taken, including during the recent 2018 elections, to protect against further interference by Russia or other hostile foreign powers?
We have undertaken a significant review of how ads are bought. We look for the origin of these accounts. We share and collaborate with law enforcement, other technology companies, and we essentially are investing a lot of effort and oversight in this area.
And looking ahead to the next Congress, I assume we can have your assurances that Google will work with this committee as we examine the issue of how to better secure our elections from future foreign interference?
Congressman, protecting our elections is foundational to our democracy, and you have my full commitment that we'll do that.
Okay, my last question, because the time is running out. What are you doing, what is Google doing to combat the spread of white supremacy and right-wing extremism across YouTube?
Congressman, YouTube is an important platform. We do want to allow for diverse perspectives and opinions, but we have rules of the road. We have clear content policies, and we have policies against many categories, and we are transparent about these policies. And and when we find violations on our policies, we do remove those videos and handle content.
When you find violations, you what?
Of our policy. For example, we have policies against hate speech, and we clearly define them. And if we find any violations there, we do take down content.
When you take down the content, do you note who put it up so you can flag future content from the same sources?
We look at it on a video by video basis. To the extent that are repeat offenses from a same account, we do take into account, and we notify the content creator, and we follow up accordingly.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Google has revolutionized the world, though not entirely in the way I expected. Americans deserve the facts objectively reported. The muting of conservative voices by internet platforms has intensified, especially during the presidency of Donald Trump. More than 90% of all internet searches take place on Google or its subsidiary, YouTube, and they are curating what we see. Google has long faced criticism for manipulating search results to censor conservatives. Conservative individuals and organizations have had their pro-Trump content tagged as hate speech or had their content reduced in search results. And enforcement of immigration laws has been tagged as hate speech as well. Such actions pose a grave threat to our democratic form of government. PJ Media found that 96% of search results for Trump were from liberal media outlets. In fact, not a single right-leaning site appeared on the first page of search results. This doesn't happen by accident, but is baked into the algorithms. Those who write the algorithms get the results they must want, and apparently management allows it. Dr. Robert Epstein, a Harvard-trained psychologist, authored a study recently that showed Google's bias likely swung 2.6 million votes to Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election. Google could well elect the next president with dire implications for our democracy. This should be of real concern to all but the most politically partisan. Those at the top set the tone. It will require a Herculean effort by the chief executive and senior management to change the political bias now programmed into the company's culture. And Mr. Pachai, let me ask my first question about those examples of political bias that I just mentioned, and you're going to hear others too. In your opening statement, you mentioned your desire to provide information that was without political bias. Clearly, that's not working. So what are you going to improve that situation?
Congressman, thanks for the question. If I may, some of the studies you mentioned, we have investigated those. There are other studies which have looked at it. We have found issues with the methodology and the sample size and so on. But let me step back and say, providing users with high quality, accurate, and trusted information is sacrosanct to us. It's what our principles are, and our business interests, our natural long-term incentives are aligned with that. We want to serve users everywhere, and we need to earn their trust in doing so.
Right. So what actions are you going to take to try to counter the political bias in some of those examples that I just gave? I mean, they're irrefutable. So it occurs, you have to take some responsibility for that bias. What do you intend to do about it?
Congressman, with respect, Dr. Epstein's study, we have investigated. We don't agree with the methodology. Happy to follow up with your office and give our findings on that study. When we look at it, we evaluate our studies to evaluate our search results. Today, we use a very robust methodology, and we've been doing this for 20 years. Making sure the results are accurate is what we need to do well, and we work hard to do that.
What does methodology have to do with the fact that 96% of the references to Trump are from liberal media?
There are always studies, which can show one set of data and arrive at conclusions. But we have looked at results on our top news category. We find that we have a wide variety of sources, including sources from the left and sources from the right, and we are committed to making sure there's diverse perspectives.
By the way, the study that I referred to was done by a self-proclaimed Democrat who voted for Hillary Clinton and said he regretted to find what he found, but he felt it was irrefutable and no one has been able to disprove him. Let me go to another question, and that is clearly there may be a difference of opinion as to the degree or amount of political bias. Would you agree to allow an independent entity to study your search results for political bias? I know you've had individuals studying that now, but you appointed them. Would you allow a third-party, independent, outside organization to study your search results and cooperate with them to determine the degree, or if any, of political bias?
Congressman, if I may make 2 points. One is, today there have been independent third-party studies looking at search results. The Economist
But you chose those third parties. I'm talking about someone truly independent.
We didn't choose those third parties. I mean, they completed those studies. The second is we are transparent as to how we evaluate search. Yes. We publish our rater guidelines. We publish it externally, and raters evaluate it, and that's how we are trying hard to understand what users want, and this is something important to us to get right. I'm happy to follow up and explain the methodology and the studies which have been done by independent third parties.
Okay. To my knowledge, again, you have picked those third parties, and I'd like to have someone truly independent study those results, number one. Number two, also to my knowledge, you've never sanctioned any employee for any type of, for manipulating the search results whatsoever. Is that the case?
The time of the gentleman has expired, but Mr. Pachai will be allowed to answer the question.
And very quickly, it's not possible for an individual employee or groups of employees to manipulate our search results. We have a robust framework, including many steps in the process.
Well, my time is up. Let me just say I disagree. I think humans can manipulate the process. It is a human process at its base. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Mr. Pachai. Google is located in Santa Clara County, my home, And I've got to say that, in contrast to the recent Amazon effort for a headquarters, Google is proposing to establish a facility in downtown San Jose, and they didn't ask for any tax subsidies. In fact, they're purchasing the land and paying the city gobs of money. I'm going to be parochial and ask a question, because I think most people in San Jose are excited by the proposal, but there's anxiety about the impact on housing and whether Google intends to be a partner with the city of San Jose to make sure that we accommodate the housing that will be necessary for the 20,000 additional employees that are proposed in San Jose.
Sorry, I missed the last part of your question.
Whether you would be a partner with the city in helping to provide additional housing to accommodate these employees.
Congressman, it's an important question. We deeply care about the community where we work. As part of this effort, we have done wide outreach, and we've committed to making sure there is affordable housing at varying affordability levels as part of the development.
Thank you so much.
We are already in touch with the city leaders there.
Thank you so much. There's so many questions, and we're not going to be able to deal with them all today. I'm hoping in the next Congress we will be able to visit with you and other tech companies to go through issues of privacy, data localization and its relationship to human rights, competition policies, the issue of takedown requests by authoritarian regimes, encryption policy and what's going on in Australia, filtering and confirmation bias and its impact on society generally, both culturally and politically. But we can't do that in the 5 minutes we have here today. So I would just like to revisit some of the questions that have already been asked. The chairman asked about location policies in your Android system, and you pointed to various apps that might provide information. Let's say I got an Android phone, and unlike most people, I don't have a single app on that phone. What information would be collected?
Congresswoman, there is a device-specific location setting which you can turn on or off. And
Let's say I turn it off.
Turn it off. There's no location information sent from that device.
Okay.
But this is a complex area. There are times, for example, your IP address may include some location information.
Correct.
It's an area we are committed to doing more to make it easier.
Now, manipulation of search results. I think it's important to talk about how search works. Right now, if you Google the word idiot under images, a picture of Donald Trump comes up. I just did that. How would that happen? How does search work so that would occur?
We provide search today for any time you type in a keyword. We, as Google, we've gone out and crawled and stored copies of billions of web pages in our index. And we take the keyword and match it against web pages and rank them based on over 200 signals. Things like relevance, freshness, popularity, how other people are using it. And based on that, at any given time, we try to rank and find the best results for that query. And then we evaluate them with external raters to make sure that, and they evaluate it to objective guidelines. And that's how we make sure the process is working.
So it's not some little man sitting behind the curtain figuring out what we're going to show the user. It's basically a compilation of what users are generating and trying to sort through that information.
Last year we served over 3 trillion searches, and just as a fact, every single day, 15% of the searches Google sees, we have never seen them before. So this is working at scale, and we don't manually intervene on any particular search result.
I would just like to note, from time to time, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle complain that they hear an individual engineer appears to be a Democrat. And I just like to put this in context. In Santa Clara County, Donald Trump in the 2016 election got 20% of the vote. That's how much of the vote he got. So it's not a surprise that the engineers who live in Santa Clara County would reflect that general political outcome. That has nothing to do with the algorithms and the really automated process that is the search engine that serves us. If we didn't have Google, we wouldn't be able to find any information in the efficient way that we do. I look forward next year to working with you on some of the very serious questions that we face. It's pretty obvious that bias against conservative voices is not one of them. Thank you very much. My time has expired, Mr. Chair.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Shabbat, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Pichai, let me start out with something real quickly. We've heard several times this morning the mention that 90% of the time that a person, he or she, does an internet search, that it's through Google. Would you basically agree that that's true?
More than ever, there are many ways users access information. Just to give an example, if you're trying to shop, if you're trying to buy something, more than 50% of product searches originate with Amazon in the US today. If you're looking for information on news, today you can get it from more sources than ever before.
But do you dispute then the 90% number?
Our internal, it's tough for us to assess the numbers. There are external studies which have shown different numbers, including lower numbers than that.
Okay. Now, you've heard the allegation this morning. I know you dispute it, but you've heard the allegation that there's a bias in favor of liberal or progressive points of view and against more conservative point of view. You've heard that this morning already. Is that correct?
Yes,
okay. Let me tell you now about a firsthand experience that I've had. I do a weekly blog. I've been doing it for the better part of 9 years now. And a while back, Republicans in the House passed legislation to repeal and replace Obamacare. Our bill was called the American Health Care Act, or the AHCA. When I was writing my blog about that, I Googled American Health Care Act, and virtually every article was an attack on our bill. Article after article alleging that our bill would result in millions and millions of people losing the great care that they were supposedly getting under Obamacare. I would argue that was completely false. But it wasn't until you got to the third or fourth page of search results before you found anything remotely positive about our bill. Let me give you a second example. The Republican tax cut bill was passed about a year ago, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, same story. Article after article attacking the Republican tax cut plan, alleging the tax cuts only went to the rich, when in actuality about 85% of taxpayers got their taxes cut, including millions and millions of middle class taxpayers. And once again, to find any article that had anything remotely good to say about our plan, you had to go deep into the search results. Now I know Google's attitude, the algorithm made us do it, but I don't know that I buy that. How do you explain this apparent bias on Google's part against conservative points of view, against conservative policies? Is it just the algorithm, or is there more happening there?
Congressman, I understand the frustration at seeing negative news, and I see it on Google. There are times you can search on Google, and page after page there's negative news which we reflect. But what is important here is we use a robust methodology to reflect what is being said about any given topic at any particular time. And we try to do it objectively using a set of rubrics. It is in our interest to make sure we reflect what's happening out there in the best objective manner possible. I can commit to you and I can assure you, we do it without regards to political ideology. Our algorithms have no notion of political sentiment.
I'm going to run out of time here. I apologize for interrupting, but and I sincerely believe that you believe what you're saying here. But you've got almost 90,000 employees. Somebody out there is doing something that just isn't working if you're looking for unbiased results. And I've seen this firsthand, time after time. I just mentioned two of the most obvious ones that people would remember. Yeah, those bills, heard about those. So I've seen it. If what I've described and some others, I'm sure you're going to hear other examples. If it is happening, do you see how conservatives believe that your company is kind of putting their thumb on the scale, so to speak, that you're in effect picking winners and losers in political discourse out there in America today, and therefore actually affecting elections? And do you see why conservatives would be concerned about this and why we're asking these kinds of questions today? There's a lot of people that think what I'm saying here is happening, and I think it's happening. So I've only got about 20 seconds to go, but I'll yield it to you.
Congressman, it's important to me that I understand these concerns. This is why I've been trying to reach out and meet people. We've done outreach. We want to explain how these things work. We are happy to look at independent studies. It's important to us to demonstrate that our products work without any bias, and we build our products in a neutral way. And I'm happy to follow up and look forward to getting a chance to explain it better.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your willingness to follow up, because I think a lot of people have a lot of questions. And I know I'm already out of time, but let me also thank Google for one thing. I happen to be chair of the House Small Business Committee, and your company has worked with an awful lot of small businesses all across the country, created a lot of jobs, and I commend you for that. Yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Pichai. I'm right here. It's a pleasure to have you here this morning. I'm going to try and answer or offer to you questions initially that require just a yes or no answer, if you would. Does Google choose conservative voices over liberal voices?
We approach our work without any political bias. We build it in a neutral way.
Answer is no, or yes or no?
No, Congressman.
If hate speech provokes violence, is that the definition beyond other aspects that you consider that you would take it down? I know there are other aspects, but particularly encouraging violence. Does that get taken down?
In primary purpose of inciting violence is what we consider as hate speech. Yes, Congressman.
And it would be taken down?
Yes, we would remove.
I want to just take note of the fact that I look forward to best practices when we start the 116th Congress in terms of having more hearings. My view is that this committee has washed its hands clean of engaging in meaningful oversight of technology platform efforts to sift through content being sold by hostile foreign actors claiming to heighten social division at the peril of democracy. I won't ask a question on that, but I will make mention of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 12, which says no one should be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy. And it's been noted that Google does engage in reviewing emails. Would you commit to adhering to Article 12 of the Declaration of Human Rights as relates to protecting the privacy of individual emails?
We think privacy is an important individual right. It's an important human right, and we are committed to upholding that, and happy to engage in any discussions with respect to that.
I'd like to do so. We know that building the U.S. economy through innovation is very important. I would like to know whether or not you would be open to Google involving the AI economy to non-traditional areas of social economic groups. Data shows the impact of not having that access. Would you be welcome, or would you welcome invitations to those communities to do more than what has been done?
Definitely, absolutely, yes.
You received a letter from the Senate a few weeks ago regarding illegal drug sales. It's quite extensive, and my question is, have you made any efforts to deal with the facilitating of sale of counterfeit, substandard, and falsified medicines sold through illegal online pharmacies?
Congressman, this is a national crisis. We have undertaken a lot of work in this area. We just recently rolled out, we participated in National Take Back Day. In Google Maps, we showed drop-off locations.